Welcome to Intermission, a brand new business podcast from the Ken. I'm Rohin Dharmakumar, nervous and excited to be one of your hosts. I'm also the co-founder of the Ken.
And I'm Sitaraman Ganesan, and I'm the Ken's deputy editor and the second host of the show. And I'm an absolute sucker for great stories.
Intermission is a podcast about the making of India's greatest companies and what comes next. What do I mean by the making of companies? Well, how these companies came to be, the people and places that made them, their culture, how they fight, how they survived, and how they won. And more importantly, how they're poised. We're sure that by telling you these incredible stories of the histories of India's greatest companies, we'll be able to leave you in a place where you're able to predict what happens next with these companies as they go into an era where they face newer rivals, newer markets, and well, a changing India itself. To create this episode of Intermission, we've spent the last few months speaking to dozens of people, employees of Asian Paints, ex-employees of Asian Paints, rival executives, analysts, dealers, painters, and customers, so that you have a better sense of this company. We've read numerous books, research reports, case studies, financial analysis. Intermission was produced with vital support and assistance from Zerodha, our season sponsor. And yes, that means we will have more seasons than one. I didn't realize I would ever say this, but you know what? I know paints is a commodity, but paints almost now to me seem magical,
Wow.
right? It's like
Yeah.
one of those things, one of my favorite references is The Matrix, and how once you see...
We've heard that enough.
I'm sorry for that, but it's the thing. It's the thing. Once I went down the rabbit hole to sort of understand paints, then I realized that, wow, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's like that, right? So at its essence, what is paint? Paint is, it's a mixture of naturally found and manufactured substances in usually a liquid form.
Something
which
to
is,
hold them together.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you apply it on a surface and, and then it provides what?
But that's the thing, right? What you think of a surface.
Yes. So everything in that can become sort of like a world in itself. Like, for example, you can apply it on any kind of surfaces, wooden surfaces, metallic surfaces, concrete, cement, like any surface virtually you can think of, you can apply it. And then the question becomes, well, why do you apply it? And then that's also true. Maybe you're applying it for aesthetic reasons, like I want it to look good. Maybe you're applying it for protective reasons because you want to protect it. Maybe you're applying it for functional reasons. Oh, I want it to resist rust. I want it to prevent sound from bouncing off. I want it to do... So it's... And then you sort of realize that really, and then you zoom out. And now I am not kidding when I tell you that now I'm suddenly seeing, oh, you know what? This metallic, this grill is painted. Is it spray painted? Is it hand painted?
Yeah.
I'm looking at all the cars that are passing by. I'm looking at every surface when you walk by a neighborhood, from the building to the gate, to the generator, to
all different kinds of paints.
Everything. It's all different kinds of paints. And for me, that was the biggest revelation, because before we sort of immersed into this story, I was largely thinking of, oh, this is going to be an Asian paint story, and it's largely going to be a story of how we paint our homes.
Yeah.
But that's not the only business that Asian Paints is in, because Asian Paints itself is in a bunch of different painting categories, and that's certainly not the world of paints, right? So if I take a step back, what really is paint? At its basic, you can break down paints into 4 components, right? There are what's called pigments and extenders, which is essentially color, right?
Which could be natural or
absolutely,
factory
right?
made.
Like, correct.
Yeah.
So if you take, let's say, indigo, one of the famous colors, like, naturally derived, etc., and all that, right? Then there are something called binders. These are essentially the things that hold together whatever your paint is in order to make sure, right? And then there's something called solvents, because ultimately you need to be able to apply it on a surface. So it, you can't just take powder and apply it. So maybe it could be a water-based solvent, it could be an oil-based
Oil-based, yeah.
solvent, etc. And then finally, there are additives. For example, you could add something to it to protect the surface from rust. You could add something to it to give it a metallic sheen, or to make, you could add something like, for example, some of the paints now from Asian paints have Teflon added to it,
Oh,
right? So that if something falls on the wall, the Teflon will make it easy to just rub it off, right? So Teflon is what, is let's say your non-stick pan is coated with it and your wall is coated with it.
by the way, this whole, like you said, we never thought about paints and colors this way before we started working on it. That's the thing about immersing yourself for months in something like this. And even colors, right? I just decided to go deep into, the history of colors. Apparently, the earliest pigments were found 350,000 years ago, right?
Wow. And naturally occurring,
Yeah.
of course, but what were they?
I don't know what exactly they were. And in the Middle Ages,
They were used to make cave paintings, because back then I can't imagine what you would do with the pigment.
yeah, certainly not to paint your car or your home. And in the Middle Ages, mixing colors was believed to be against the natural order of things, right? So you just couldn't do it. I mean, no one thought it was something that people just stayed away from, mixing colors, right? Now imagine if we didn't mix colors, would we have this? Nothing, right? So I think it's just the history of paint and colors is just absolutely fascinating. And I also read Henry Ford didn't want his cars to be painted anything but black, despite.
Oh, that's the origin of the saying, you can have any car as long as it's black.
Yeah.
Why? Why didn't he want?
He just believed that's the only color that looks good, and that's all customers need, even though customers wanted other colors. Finally, he gave in.
I'm also guessing probably it's easier to just stick with one paint.
Yeah, I mean, he was all about efficiency and economies of scale, right? So why would you, if I can just roll out, 100,000 cars which are just the same color, right? It just brings down my costs. Yeah.
Would you drive a black car today?
No, not in Bombay.
That's why I asked you that.
Yeah.
Have you, before you got into this episode, have you ever gone and, let's say, gotten your home painted and bought paint and what's been your...
No, I got my house painted as I was researching the episode.
Was the trigger that, that I'm researching Asian paints?
It was long overdue. It just happened to be around the same time, right? But I'm terrible with colors. I still remember in college, I was taught the color wheel again and again and again. I just couldn't get it for the life of me. I'm not a very visual person. And they would just keep telling me RGB, and this is why. I'm like, what is it? What is it? What is it? Which two colors make which one? I just kept doing it again and again and again, right? So I shouldn't be the person sort of telling others about colors, but
if you're fascinated by colors, then well, then I guess that's our test for that. But to come back to paints, so paints broadly. We spoke about how what goes into making a paint, and if you really look at the sort of paints that exist right now, and if you just zoom out from what's on your walls, there's usually what's called emulsions.
Yeah.
And emulsions can be either water-based emulsions or oil-based emulsions, right? They're called emulsions because it is all in it, and then you can sort of apply it easily. Then you have something called enamel paints, which is
for wood, right?
Yeah. Exactly, which goes into wood, right? Then you have, of course, distempers. We talked about distemper earlier, right? From the earliest days of let's say, tuna to modern distempers as well. Actually, let me do this as a test, right? When you got your home painted, was it a surprise to you that people didn't just come in and paint the wall and leave? What did they do to the walls of your home?
They prep it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's
what did they do?
It's primer,
do you
putty,
remember?
primer,
but before, didn't they scrape it first?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right? They take a sandpaper and scrape the entire to remove the earlier layer of paint and to kind of smoothen it.
Right. And I think it's primer, putty, primer, and then two coats. Yeah.
It changes. It depends, because I actually went and met the guy who's painted my home the last couple of times. He's a Asian Paints contractor. He's been doing this for the last, I think he's been doing since 1992 or
So
so.
when you called him,
right?
he thought you were going to get the house painted again. And he said, no, I want to
Yeah.
talk to you for the
No,
episode.
so he was actually working somewhere in the neighborhood. So I
okay.
went over. He was painting. His name is Krishna Gaikwad. I asked him about his own story, how he got into it, which is very interesting. He got into painting. His dad was in the painting business. He went to school, and then, like, he and a bunch of friends realized that maybe we won't find jobs even if we went to college. So let's start this business. Then he got into that, worked with his dad. Then his dad took him to Hyderabad, and where he painted for a few years. So after 3-4 years of working with his dad, then he sort of became a contractor, came to Bangalore, and of course now what happens is, like, and most of his work comes through word of mouth.
Okay.
So a really good friend recommended him to me because I was asking, we need to get a home painted. He said, talk to this person. And that was 15 years ago.
I know this really good fitness trainer. You should.
Yes,
But-
this is right. So anyway, I'll talk about, like, Krishna and the painting business more in detail later. But when I asked him the same question, that is it always the same formula that when you paint a home, right?
Okay.
It changes. He said, look, it depends. If you're getting a new home, right, it's actually more work, because in the new home, then they actually have to apply multiple coats to make sure that everything. But if it's already a smooth wall and it was painted earlier before, then they'll just scrape it, and then they'll just apply putty on it and primer. And increasingly, many of the newer paints as well, they have something called the self-priming paints. So by the way, just to kind of explain what the putty is, it's like a wet cement, like, which
So
you
white
mix.
cement, right?
That's right. It's wet cement, and after the walls are cleaned and, like, usually whether a primer coat is pasted or not, the putty is pasted on the walls to make sure that the walls are smooth first.
Yeah.
Right, and then they're smooth, and then usually either underneath or overneath, a primer coat is painted. The primer essentially, it masks the underlying color. So sometimes, and it's happened to me before, one of the classic mistakes is when you move into a home or when you're getting your home painted, you get this really nice, let's get a nice deep dark red color, right? And then you realize that, damn, it shouldn't have got such a bright color because it wears very fast, and then you get tired of it. Oh my God, I'm seeing this very strong color every day.
Not just that, light, right? We didn't realize.
Light comes on, absolutely.
So we just went from this pale shade of yellow or almost off-white to this light blue. And now we have to turn on the lights even in the morning.
Yes, these are things that you learn firsthand, because when you look at a shade card, you can't make out how it fits in your home, right? But anyway, the point is, now when you've got a dark coat and now you realize that this is too dark, I need to apply a light coat the next time, you can't just do that directly because the underlying coat is dark, and no matter how many coats you apply, it will always show through. So then you scrape it off, you apply a primer coat on it. So the primer essentially covers that and masks it a certain bit. And the primer also makes it easier for the paint layer on top to stick better. Sometimes if the color is really dark, they'll apply 2 coats of primer or 3 coats of primer, right? And then you realize that never again. You never want to go from a darker wall to a lighter wall without, like, that level of preparation. And then the final coats on top could be anywhere from 2 coats to 3 coats, sometimes even 4 coats,
But we've
depending
come a
on.
long way, right? There were those years when, until about a couple of decades ago, it would smell a lot. You had to be out of your house for a week or at least that room, right?
Yes.
That has changed dramatically.
It's changed. I told you, when I was young, when I was a kid, we used to get our home painted, and you'd have these particles flying throughout this thing because that's that distemper, right?
Yeah.
And these days there's nothing. Not only, some of Asian paints, best paints, there's absolutely, these are emulsion paints, right? So there's nothing flaking, there's nothing flying. And also, I think since they've moved away from oil-based emulsions
To water-based
emulsions, there is this increasing thing of oil-based paints, after you paint them, lead to what is called VOCs, volatile organic compounds, right? So now one of the marketing pegs is use water-based emulsions because you will not even get those fumes subsequent to painting. So there's been a lot of, like I said, Teflon-coated paints, water-based paints, etc., and all that, right? It's a huge thing. I've seen that myself because I remember when I was a kid, and when you had a wall and accidentally a splotch came on the wall, it would never go.
all hell broke loose.
Right. I mean, and yes, we've all as kids paid that price. But these days, even if something falls on it, you can just literally go and wipe it off and it actually just goes off because that's how much paints have evolved, right?
These are the swatches from when you painted your house.
Yes, this is the thing. I actually had a
Do you
few
still
of
get
these.
these when you?
I'm sure you still get
Or
this,
they
right?
just
So this
you,
is
there's an
this
app
is
where you look at things.
you know what? Again, first-hand thing, Praveen, and he's made this mistake as well. And a lot of us made this mistake. What you see on screen is not the same as what it's going to appear, right? So if you're getting
So
your
is
home
this
painted,
close?
yes, it is. Because these are literally, if you touch these, you sort of notice these are not printed. These are actually painted, right? So these swats are about as close as you can get. So you can essentially take it in your home and you put it against sunlight or in the actual room and then you see what it is. And then you kind of like decide which one you want. I still remember.
Which
So,
one? Which one
yes,
is which shade did you choose?
well, a bunch, but I think the light wall was, I think, L132. Remember the codes? It was L132. So I think it was white linen or something like that, which was for the walls. And when we got our home painted, we actually made an Excel sheet with the codes because we wanted to know that whenever we get them repainted again, if we want the same paint, we can just have the code and just go and tell them to do it. And we actually did that.
Okay.
Right? So that Excel sheet was very useful.
It's not like they told you we stopped selling that shade, right? I mean,
no,
you can. Yeah, I mean, you can mix it.
So, okay. Because all of these shades these days are often mixed, by a computer.
Yeah.
Right? So I think
you get exactly what you want, right?
In the olden days, there were either predetermined shades or the painter is mixing them by hand. It's come a long way since then. I think we should definitely talk about it. So even to finally move on from, I think, just a description of paints, what kind of paints exist? Well, there are, of course, the, decorative paints inside your home. There's also automotive paint, which is fairly big. Every single car is getting, brilliant paint jobs, right? There's industrial coatings, which is in construction, like, the bridges that are going up, the generators that you see, all of that, right? There's powder coatings, by the way, right? Like,
Foams
which is, if you see many of these, I think the metal bars, etc., in like grills, etc., they're usually not hand painted, they're powder coated with a spray gun, etc. And of course, marine coatings, that's where Asian Paints started with Battleship Grey, right? Yeah. And of course, like, any kind of paint which goes into packaging, food items, the caps, etc. So like I said, once you see it, you just realize it's everywhere. And that's why it is such a magical business to be in, because it's almost like, anything that is being made will ultimately need to have paint on it. Because if you decide not to have paint on it, then you need to change the underlying material. Imagine in a tropical country like India, how many kinds of materials do you have that don't require any kind of protective coating? Right? So that's
very few. Yeah. But yeah, interestingly, I mean, good that you mentioned Battleship Grey. When Asian Paints was founded, it was pretty much the entire industry was industrial, right? We talked about how homes were not painted, a lot of homes were not even pakka, right? But now it's changed, it's swung to the other extreme, right? Now
it's inverted.
Yeah, decorative is what, like 70-75% of the market, right? So naturally, Asian Paints is almost entirely decorative. But you have certain other players, which are, say, Berger is roughly about 20% from industrial, and you have Kanza and Aerolac, which is 45% industrial. And then you have Akzo Nobel, which is again 40%, right? So a lot of its major competitors sort of lean more towards industrial than Asian Paints does, and even JSW, right? It got into this business because it had a huge captive requirement for its steel factories, right? So it got into the business through industrial. So Asian Paints is an anomaly of sorts in that it continues to be a decorative first company.
And I think it's full circle, right? Remember, they got into this space because all the other spaces were taken and the doors got shut in front of them by the big companies, the big distributors, and they said, fine, we'll find our own markets. And they expanded that pie and they inverted that market and made decoratives the largest market. And now everyone else wants in on that space. Mind you, even though some of these other companies are bigger in, let's say, the industrial space is still not, there is no value of a brand,
Yeah.
right? And, it's still, I mean, technology can be gotten by anyone. So there is no real differentiation, in the industrials space.
But even decorative, I think someone told me that someone who's been in paints for almost 25, 30 years told me that any sort of product innovation that you have, you have a 3-month advantage. That's about it, right? In the 4th month, you'll have a competitor reverse engineering that thing and launching their own product, right? So, which is why having a brand that sort of stands out becomes super important, right? So that's why we just automatically sort of think of Asian Paints. But if you were to take an Asian Paints, product and compare it with an equivalent product from any of the other,
Say you did a blind test.
Yeah.
It will be very hard for
Yeah.
people to kind of make out.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Paint in that sense is a commodity, but Asian Paints has managed to turn it into a brand. I actually asked my painter, the painting contractor, if he looks back over the last, whatever, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, and the homes that he paints, how many people actually ask
For Asian.
or aware of a paint and ask for a paint brand, right? He thought a bit about it and he said roughly 50 to 60% people say, I want Asian paints,
Okay.
right? That's how strong it is. And in some senses, what he told
So
me.
what does he do for the other 40%?
The other 40% are usually, I want to get my home painted.
Here's
Take a call.
Here's how much I'm
Right?
willing to spend.
Yeah, I mean, here's how much I'm willing to spend, or basically they are.
So
they don't know that.
Does he usually choose Asian Paints as well?
Well, yes. Again, it's habit, right? It comes down to this. So, by the way, people don't come with a budget up front. They'll typically call someone and that person will come in. They'll measure their homes and like surface areas, etc. And they'll come and say, it'll take you so much to paint, and it'll take you so many days. That's usually the starting point. And then people will say, I want it done faster. If they say done faster, then the painting contractor will have to hire more painters, right? So you'll say, instead of 7 days, I'll do it in 5 days, but I need to hire more people, right? And if they say, I need to look really good, then they'll say, I need to put more coats, etc. So it's the starting point of that negotiation, right?
Painters are the influencers of this industry, right?
Absolutely. I think that word, there was literally, someone who said that this is an influencer-led market, right? And you're
they weren't
sort of
talking about
wondering,
your YouTubers and Instagrammers.
it's not at all, right? Let's go back to that. What happens? The series of events that starts when you decide to get your home painted is very interesting, right? Because you said, you got your home painted recently, right? Did you go visit a store?
No, I didn't.
Right? Who bought the paints for you?
The painter.
Your painting contractor, right? Did you tell him which specific paint to get?
Yeah, I mean, he brought a
Wait
few...
1 second. See what's happening? He brought something to you and asked you to select?
We told him roughly what we want and then he just chose.
Right.
Yeah.
So see how much power he has. With most people, what happens is the sequence of events is...
So we're not the first customers. Actually, we're not even... I mean, for every paint company, they are the customers. They're the ones who get to decide. Or they influence our decisions.
Yes.
Right?
The painter is actually the strongest, is the influencer here.
Knowing your customer means knowing your painter.
Yes. And in Asian Paints, it's also knowing your painter and knowing your dealer. Firstly, the painter has a comfort with it. I asked him, look, 50-60% people say Asian Paint, so that's decided. And of the remaining, I said, what do you prefer? He said, I mostly prefer Asian because I've been painting with Asian Paints for the last 30 years, right? He has tried some of the other ones, of course, Berger and Birla Opus, etc. And he said, it's fine, it's no different. Then I said, why don't you pick those more often? He said, this is something that I know. When I buy a can of paint, if it has X liters, I know exactly how much area I can cover with it, right? So there is this saying, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Even though sometimes, the newer competitors like Birla Opus, etc., give more discounts, they're like, sure, but they may give me 10% more, but I don't know. This is a new animal, and I'm familiar with this. Because at the end of the day, the painter is answerable to the homeowner.
If you mess up, it's on you. It's not on the paint company,
So you don't want to take that. So there is this strong decades worth of trust and brand in Asian Paints and its quality in painters, and that automatically translates, right? So when the painter goes to this thing, they're usually picking Asian Paints. 50-60% people are telling him Asian Paints, and he picks Asian Paints for the remaining in the 30-40% cases. So roughly in 80% of the cases, he's painting Asian Paints.
Yeah, how your home looks after you get it painted is not just a reflection of the quality of the paint, but also of the painter's craft.
Yes,
right?
The craft also comes in.
Yeah.
Now think about it. Let's say you
Which
got...
is why he doesn't want to take chances, right?
He doesn't, because it's also a very word of mouth business, right? Remember, he's an influencer. What do influencers do? They influence. But what are influencers really aware of? They are aware of the fact that their influence is based on trust, right? And they're very careful of that. So I got to know him because a friend referred him to me, and I've referred him to other people. So he wants to make sure that he maintains that. That's one part. Now think about what happens the first time when you get your home painted, and maybe you didn't make that choice, but the painter made that choice. And at the end of it, obviously, you get a bill, you get all of that, and you realize that it's Asian Paints. Now imagine what happens the second time. It's 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, you want to get your home repainted. Now, unless you had a terrible experience the last time, now you're going to stick with Asian Paints because you got it the first time. So that first introduction to Asian Paints, which may come from the influencer, is enough to get you, hopefully, to be a customer for life.
Because I'm already being forced to choose the shade and, different shades for different rooms possibly, right?
That's right.
But so don't make me choose the company also, the brand also, right?
Yeah. And this itself is, it's very hard to get these days, because what usually happens is, and I love going to hardware stores, don't ask me why, but I just love, so when I went there, now of course these things are not handed out. Usually they hand out much smaller brochures with the latest colors and 3-4 things, which are these things. So normally they'll say, you can take a look at this. And of course, my wife has told me, you have to bring it back because we have to see it in our home. And I'm like, how do I bring it? So the guy's like, no, I can't give it to you. You have to give me a 500 or 1,000 rupee deposit.
Oh, okay.
No, this is not for sale.
Okay.
Remember, but these guys also know that, if they take it, they're probably never bringing it back. So they say you have to leave a deposit. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, fine, here's a deposit. But then I bring it back and it's so useful. And I'm thinking, did I just buy it for 500 or 1,000 rupees?
Yeah, you did.
And I did. And I'm sure Asian Paints is aware of it. And I'm sure these hardware dealers are aware of it, and it happens. But it's great because I've referred to it.
How old is this?
This must be about 10 years old now. And we've used it again and again. And I'm sure they've updated it, because the newer ones, I think, have these screws where you can just take them out and take out some of the swords which are no longer there, and insert new ones, and it's as good as new.
Fascinating.
Yes, fascinating. Paints. If you look at it economically, paints, because it is so widespread and goes into so many aspects of everything that we do, is a great, it almost, you can assume that if the Indian economy is growing at X% growth, paints will usually grow at 50 to 100% more than that. So you can sort of double it. If the Indian economy is growing at, let's say, 7%, you can assume that paints is growing at 9% or 10%, right? Like, 12%, etc., right? Like, depending on how good things are. Because it is so widespread, which is why it's such the pie, if you go back, and when we said in 1967 what happened and why this market is so big today, you have to understand it's really the Indian economy and the GDP where it has grown from 1967 to 2026, and paints has grown, if it grew at 50% more than that.
So it's very easy for you to which is why it's so irresistible to a lot of these groups, right? Like Birla and JSW. If you know that India is going to grow at a minimum sort of rate of 6%, 7%, you know that you're looking at an industry growth of at least 10%, or if you're lucky, 15%, right? That's a lot.
Yep. Large business groups love that, right? Like conglomerates.
And a big chunk of the market is still unorganized.
Yes.
Right?
Actually, I have the numbers for that. 20% of the paint market is broadly unbranded, right? 50 to 60% of interior space in India is unpainted.
Wow.
So
That's
really,
a-
I mean, I think we missed speaking about this when we were speaking about Gattu, the
Yeah.
brand mascot, which was retired in 2002. But I think some of Gattu's ad campaigns had him being mischievous. If you also notice his grin, he's got a mischievous grin, right? Some of them had him doing naughty things like painting someone's head,
Oh.
right? And I think the tagline used to be that if it's a surface, you can paint it with Asian paints. I'm
Right.
sort of paraphrasing here, right? Any surface you can think, you can paint it with Asian paints. So that's really what. Now you come back to today and you look at the fact that 50 to 60% surfaces are unpainted.
Still.
Yeah. And now think about it, right? Like, this is why I said it's so magical.
And you have all these state government, central government programs, on housing.
Yeah.
Right? And thousands of crores are set aside every single year. I'm not even talking about, then you have all the private real estate development, right? There's affordable housing and whatnot, right? And there are factories being built all around the country.
Flyovers. How many flyovers? If you notice, there are some flyovers which are just concrete, and then there are flyovers which are painted. So really, when I said it's magical, it's that. You sort of look at every surface now and say, this could be painted.
Yeah.
If you're sure that India and its GDP is going to grow over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you can be fairly sure that a lot of surfaces are going to require painting and the paint market is going to grow, which is why all these new entrants are sort of coming up, right? One of the stats that I heard is that there are roughly 1 million painters in the original influencers, right? In fact, the painters, the people who paint, you'd think that they're professional painters, all of them. But a large majority of them are temporary painters. So painting as a profession is not something which is where someone does it 12 months. Sure, there are people who are professional painters and do 12 months of the year, but a lot of the painters are seasonal painters.
Yeah.
Right? So,
you could probably, if you're in Maharashtra, in Western Maharashtra, during sugarcane harvest season, you go there and work as a farm laborer, right? Then move to Pune or Bombay to paint.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. So, that's what I was asking my painting contractor, where remember, he's Seth.
Yeah.
So, where his painters come from. And he said they come from Madhya Pradesh, they come from Maharashtra, etc. And I asked him, why do they come? How do they come? And he said that, look, they want to make money for 3-4 months. So they leave their village. Whenever they want to make money, they come to Bangalore, they paint for 3-4 months, and then they go back.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because, between 2000 and 2026, the past 20, in the past 25, 26 years, the cost of labor has shot up 4 times, while the cost of paints has only shot up 2 times. Right? So this is also thanks to all the innovation and supply chain and economies of scale, efficiencies, right? So even if you look at Asian Paint's own sort of paint prices, right? The last 15, 20 years, the average annual increase is 3%. That's less
It's
than
a very tight ship they run.
It's not just inflation proof, it's less than the inflation rate. Right? That's incredible. And the margins haven't dropped. Until the past, until a couple of years ago. So you continue to keep prices pretty much the same, nominal increases every, say, 2-3 years, but your margins still stay the same. For you to be able to do that, you need to be very, very efficient. And this is true not just of Asian Paints, some of the other large players as well, right? I found this fascinating.
Do you have the numbers for what the ratio has changed for labor to paint costs over the last? Because I think I remember reading somewhere, and it was very interesting how much of a percentage, if you get your home painted these days, what percentage of your cost is labor versus...
Yeah. Someone did tell me that. Let me look it up.
We'll come to it later, but anyway.
Yeah, someone actually told me 60% is, 60 to 70% is labor.
Yeah.
Right?
So think about it, right? Like when you get your home painted, like you sort of think that the paint is the most expensive thing. It is not. It's the application of it which is the most expensive thing, right?
And also this person said, 60, 70% is cost. and the rest is what, like, material which includes your emulsion, putty, and all of that, right?
Yeah.
And he said, and this is the cost of switching to another brand, right? He said, even if you do, I mean, Asian Paints is pricier than all the other brands, but the overall, I mean, even if you like, so if you switch to Berger or Nerolac, you're only saving about 3%, 3 to 4%, right? So, do you really want to do that? That's the question.
And that's the thing which is so hard for these newcomers to break, right? Which is, firstly, Asian Paints runs an incredibly tight ship, right? As the market leader with whatever 50 to 60% market share, it could choose to increase prices if it wants to, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm fairly certain a large percentage of its consumers will be okay. But because it doesn't, it makes it harder for competitors to come and undercut it on price unless they're willing to take a loss.
Yeah.
Right? So who's the competitor who's right now spending the most money trying to undercut
But
Asian
you'll have to
Paints?
undercut it like seriously, because this whole equation, right? Labor paint cost ratio. Because labor is 70%, you have to undercut Asian Paints to such an extent that the savings are reasonable.
That's right.
It's not 3%, 4%, it's 15%. For that, you have to spend a lot of money.
It's not easy, right?
Yeah.
Because if someone says, let's say Birla Opus, I think Birla Opus is one of the most important schemes is they offer a 10% volume discount,
Yeah.
which is very clever, because when you say a 10% volume discount, it means if you're buying a liter of paint, you get 1.1
1 liter,
liter,
yeah.
right? Now, the homeowner never gets to know about this or see about this, but now the painter has effectively got 10% more, as paint, so therefore 10%
Again,
more as margin.
if at all, I mean, if Birla Opus has to continue growing and continue clawing market share from Asian Paints and others, it's the influencer, who can make that happen. Because again, it doesn't make a difference to the customer, right? I don't know what the cost savings are going to be, but if my painter tells me this is great, do it, it's as good as Asian Paints or even better, maybe I'll go with him.
No, but think about it now again. Let's go back to that 70-30 split or something now. Let's say Birla Opus is 10% cheaper than Asian Paints. But paint itself, when you're painting your home, is just about 30-40% of the cost. So you're talking about 10%
Of
off
30%.
30%,
Exactly,
which is 3%.
Exactly.
Right? And, so most of these painting contractors are smart enough to not even come and tell you that. Because imagine, why would you go to your customer and say, look, do you want to select this thing which will be 3% cheaper?
No, but if I continue to get 10% extra, right, and that sort of adds to my margins, right, I'm not going to tell them you're going to save 3%. I'm just going to tell them this is as good as Asian Paints, right?
And yet it's not happening because the history and trust that painters have with Asian Paints, which is to say, if I buy tractor emulsion and
Well,
if
it has
I buy
happened
this,
to some extent. I mean,
that's right.
the market share has dropped from 59 to 52%.
That's true.
Right.
That's true.
It has happened, but I think it's happened because they have really, really pampered dealers and painters, right? The question is, how long can they continue doing that?
Biggest factor, like, which supports all of this is the dealer.
Yeah.
The dealer is the one that sort of underpins all of this. And I think it's incredible because if you go back and like you remember Asian Paints history, they forged these direct relationships with dealers.
Kitchen relationships.
Kitchen relationships. And they're incredibly powerful. So if you think that the painter is the influencer, yes, who's the painter getting influenced by?
The dealer.
It's by the dealer.
Right.
Right? And I think it's really instructive to understand, what this typical dealer is. Like I said, I love visiting hardware stores, and I've, been to a bunch of them. Like, usually run in my area, they run by Rajasthani Marwadi families, etc. New Mataji Hardware, etc. Right? Roughly, I think 95 to 97% of the decorative paints business is direct to dealer.
Yeah.
Right? So the dealer is the one who's actually buying the paint. Right? And if you go to a typical dealer store, they're not very big, right? So they're like 500, 600 to 1,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Right?
And they're all in a particular on a particular street, right? The hardware street, right?
Yes, yes.
Where you
I
can
always wonder how they all make money, yet they do.
Yeah.
Right? So they typically will keep 3-4 brands. There are rarely places that I've seen which will have only one brand.
Yeah.
Sure, Asian Paints will be
Yeah.
the ones whose cans have the most shelf space, but they're usually 3-4 brands as well, right? And many of them have, the modern marvel of
Yeah.
painting technology, which we haven't talked about, which is the ATM of, right? Like, I mean, if you think about how the ATM changed Indian banks and how we withdraw money, we no longer, like, if you ask my dad how he withdrew money, he would take, like, his passbook and checkbook and then go to the bank and present it to the teller, and the teller would give money and make an entry in his passbook. We don't do that.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, we do UPI.
Yeah.
But precursor to UPI was ATM. We just go and enter a card into an ATM, punch a few buttons, and money comes out. It's the same with paints. You have this very ATM looking machine in these hardware stores where you go and tell them, you along with your painter, usually just your painter, that here's a color code that I want. And they enter into a computer which is attached to these machines. And then the machine just creates, just like an ATM magically gives you money. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's certainly coming from somewhere. This ATM machine for paints, which is called a tinting machine, makes it literally on the spot.
Yeah.
It has a certain pre-mixed base colors within it. It sort of mix it, then it adds some other tinting colors, and it gives you the exact color that you want it. And of course, there's also this.
I think this was also born out of a constraint, right? I mean, this printing machines were not introduced by Asian Paints in India. It was Jensen Nicholson.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
You have 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 shades. You can't, as a company, you can't send so many boxes, right? Or tubs of paints, all these shades. And the retailer doesn't have that much space, right? He's got like...
Yeah, roughly 500 liters is what these people stock.
Yeah,
I mean, in their
of the major colors, right? So, and he's got 3 or 4 brands. So he doesn't have a lot of shelf space, right? So you need to be able to produce the shade that the customer wants. So how do you do that, right?
So to continue this line of thought, if you really think about the tinting machine, what it's allowing is for the dealer to give you whatever paint you want when you come and ask for it. Of course, there are nuances to this. It's not that the tinting machine magically makes it out of air. It still needs to be replenished, and there are a bunch of other codes which are physically sent to the dealer. But once a dealer gets a tinting machine, it's expensive.
Yeah.
Right? I don't remember. Do you remember how much one of these tinting machines costs?
It's a few lakh rupees.
Yeah.
And Birla Opus, I think, gave them out free.
That's right. Yeah. Because once somebody gets a tinting machine, you have to understand that the dealer is also, we talked about constraints. Imagine, visualize a dealer shop and see the constraints. They can store a maximum of 500 liters. So if you're the 4th or the 5th paint company that's coming and asking, they literally don't have the space. In that space, where they've got a counter, they've got people walking in, they've also placed a tinting machine. Now that space is taken. Now if somebody else comes and says, you keep my tinting machine, unlike a bank's ATM, a tinting machine is very specific to a brand and a manufacturer. So an Asian Paints tinting machine is not going to produce paint for Birla Opus, right, or JSW or Berger. So now the second company has to come in and say, can you put my tinting machine as well? Now, most of the times, it's a space constraint.
Yeah.
I just don't have the space to put it. And if you ask me to put it, I would have to remove Asian Paints, which nobody wants to do. Or even if they do have the space, these are smart businessmen. They're thinking, I've already put down a few lakhs for this. I'm not spending any more money, which is why Birla has to give them away for free of cost, right? So that they'll put these tinting machines.
Yeah.
And again, so now you put these tinting machines, you've got these dealers, you've got these relationships. Now imagine you're a new paint company, maybe you're Birla, maybe you're someone else. And, and I was thinking, can't you just, we Indians inherently understand how shopkeepers work. Like when you go to a shop and you ask a shopkeeper for, give me a packet of biscuits, and he or she recommends a packet of biscuits to you, What's going on in your mind? Why is this person recommending this biscuit to me? Because
what are they getting out of this?
what are they getting out of this? What's their margin? We always do that. We do that all the time. Or you're just recommending this to me because you're getting a higher margin for this. We think we're too clever, right? Now imagine how this plays out in the paints business. Say Asian Paints gives a margin of, I'm just going to make up this number, right? 2%, right? And a new paint company comes in and says, you know what, I'm going to give you a 5% margin. Sell my paint instead. Do you think it'll work? Do you think this will succeed?
It has to some extent, but you're missing one very important thing, which is that the reason why Birla Opus has been able to get this far is because they are giants in putty and white cement.
Yes, Birla Putty is the market leader.
Which they make through Ultratech, right? Which is owned by Grasim, which also owns Birla Opus, right? So what's really interesting here is 70% of the dealers that keep white cement and putty also keep paint, right? So they already had a dealer network that they could tap. They were not new to this business. I mean, they already had dealers who had Asian Paints probably, but they were as loyal to Ultratech as they were to Asian Paints. So now the company that owns Ultratech is telling them, listen, why don't you try our paint, right? I know we know that you're really, really loyal to Asian Paints, but you can trust our brand as well. And we're going to throw in a sweetener, multiple sweeteners, right? You get a tinting machine free, you get better margins, you get a better credit period, right? And that's exactly how they've been able to sign up, what, about 40,000 dealers so far?
Right.
That's insane.
And yet, the market share that they've actually clawed from Asian Paints is not that significant yet. And
but
I wanted to
talking
understand
about 18 months.
Yeah.
Right?
During which they lost a CEO.
Yeah, that's okay. But still, they're looking, I mean, roughly about 5%, 5 to 6% market share.
Yeah.
Right? No other company has been able to do this. And that's because
10,000
no other
crores buys you a lot of time.
No, but other hardware companies, or rather companies that sell through hardware stores, have also tried this, right? JSW Cement,
yes,
right? Pidilite, which sells adhesives. They also have their own brand of paint, which they launched around 2020, 2021 called Haisha. But the thing is, there isn't a great deal of overlap between between steel and paints, between adhesives and paints. But there is between putty and paint. And that's Birla's advantage.
Yes, I fully give it to you that Birla has the advantage that their staff and employees are already dealing with these distributors, right? So I have no argument there. But that doesn't mean that these distributors are like, for the earlier reason that I mentioned, like because of their constraints and like, they're just going to like adopt this. I want to go back and demonstrate the margin example to which really comes down to why Asian Paints leadership is so strong. Now, in my conversation with a bunch of people, I realized that the name of the game isn't margins. Asian Paints doesn't need to give a big margin. The name of the game is actually something called turns. Turns means how many times you're able to move a particular product in a period of time. Let's take a day, and I'll illustrate using an example, right? Let's say in Asian Paints, people go to a shop and they ask for Asian Paints, and it sells, and the dealer is making, let's assume 2% margin each time, and consumers or a customer or a painter buys Asian Paints 5 times a day, right? So that's 5 into 2, which is 10% margin, right? Now, let's assume that a newcomer comes and says, I'll offer you a 5% margin.
But they don't get the kind of inventory turns.
They don't get the kind of inventory turns because nobody is asking for those paints enough. Now, assume that they are getting 2 orders a day, right? Which means 5 into 2, 10. So now think you're the dealer. In the first case, you're getting 2% 5 times over. That's 10. In the second case, you're getting 5% 2 times over, which is also 10. So, you'd think as a layperson that, well, at this point, the dealer should be agnostic. They're making 10 either ways, but that's wrong because the dealers always prefer
volume,
turns. And turns is important, which again goes back. This is like one of those threads that you unravel, right? Because what happens, again, because I've seen this happen, if you go to a hardware store, the painter will go there and say, I have to paint this home tomorrow and I've just got the order. I want these paints, or I'm painting it later in the afternoon. So the dealer looks at it and says, yes, 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 this is not there.
Hmm.
Right? Let's say, the moment he says this is not there, what is the painter going to
It's
do?
going to go to
The
the next
painter is
store.
going to go to the, so the dealers lost that business,
Hmm.
right? So which is why turns is very important for a dealer, because the dealer wants to make sure that when someone comes to them,
It's always
they are
available.
able to immediately satisfy that, and they come back and they come back. So a dealer always opts for lower margin but faster selling items. This is the reason why Nokia at a particular point in time, when it was absolutely the king in India, this example came up. It used to offer the lowest margins
Oh, I didn't know that.
as a phone business,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
But because everyone wanted a Nokia, all the dealers needed to have a Nokia.
Ah.
Because people would come to them and say, I want a Nokia phone. And if you don't have a Nokia phone, they're just going to go to the other place which has a Nokia phone. So turns is the thing. I mean, we've talked about the power of the brand, we've talked about constraints of spaces, but because turns is so important, which again is connected to its popularity, dealers are okay accepting a lower margin from.
Yeah.
And what does Asian Paints do with this lower margin? It takes that margin and goes and reinvests
In
into
business.
its own business and supply chain to make it even faster.
Yeah.
I think you know how many times in a day an Asian Paints
Roughly,
dealer,
I mean, yeah, I think in Bombay it's roughly 2 to 3 times a day.
3 times a day.
Mm.
When you go to, you'd never have this understanding that, wow, somebody is coming from Asian Paints thrice a day to restock a dealer. That's the importance of turns, right?
Yeah.
So just coming in and offering a higher margin is not enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably one of the things that you can sort of do. And, so this is why I think dealers are so powerful in this overall ecosystem, and why Asian Paints has done such a fantastic job of. So this money that they're essentially taking, if you really, I mean, if you're Asian Paints and you're saying, I'm offering dealers a lower margin, a different company, a lesser company would say, great, I have more profits to keep with myself and return to my shareholders,
Mm.
but not Asian Paints.
Mm.
Because Asian Paints is like, I'm going to take this money that I saved in the margin that I'm not paying to dealers, and I'm going to go and reinvest it into
But
my.
I mean, they do both, to be fair to them. I'll come to that later. I mean,
Yeah.
they do a great job of investing in growing their business and in rewarding their shareholders through dividends, right? I don't think any company comes close to Asian Paints on both these fronts.
But the I think the dividend and shareholder rewards come as a
result-
function of
yeah.
the fact of how efficient they are in their supply chain, right?
Yeah.
Because if you really think about it, like, remember we talked about Asian Paints wanting to create a system to beat the system. That is what they have done.
Mm.
In order to crack this system, you can't just attack it from one place.
Mm.
A newcomer can't just come and say, I'll spend 10,000 crores and offer a better margin. Well, that's not enough. You got to attack turns. But to attack turns, you need to attack the fact that, oh, is your supply chain fast enough that you're manufacturing paints and sending it thrice a day?
Mm.
Well, you need to do that as well. So in order to, and of course, there's the brand aspect where people are like, if it's Asian Paints, I'll just take it.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of break this entire system that they've created, which is so beautifully over the last so many decades, in order to attack Asian Paints. And that's not easy. Momentum is winning is, I think, what someone had told me in this case, that you're not, Asian Paints' advantage with dealers and painters is momentum.
80-year momentum.
Right. Yes, a momentum built over 80 years. They're able to send things much faster than others. They're able to replenish it faster than others. And that you can't just attack momentum with a higher margin or with a better brand, etc.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but there is this term which sort of puts me to sleep every time someone mentions it, and it is supply chain.
It
The
puts me
moment
to sleep.
someone, right? The moment someone says we're going to talk about supply chain strategy, I'm like, okay. But if you really think about it, like, again, there are a bunch of things in this story that we got interested in after we dived headlong into it. I would actually say that supply chain is one of them.
I just wish there were another term to describe it, right?
Why is it that Asian Paints was able to do turns better at a dealer?
Yeah.
right? Why was it able to move faster than others? And it comes down to the term that we can't avoid, which is supply chain actually, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. it sounds very simple. Oh, what difference does it make? Once a day, once a week, 2 times a day, right? So in a city like Bombay, sure, you have a depot, you're able to do it, right? But you're talking about this in a
At
country of
India
India.
scale.
Yeah, right. And they began in rural India. And now you're talking about every single state in the country, right? And this wouldn't be possible if they didn't have factories around the country, right? I think they now have about 16 factories, out of which 11 are just for paints.
Yeah.
Right? Except in the east, I think they sort of cater to that part of the country through a factory in Andhra Pradesh, in Visakhapatnam. But they've got pretty much every corner of the country covered, right? So 11 factories and roughly 150 depots or warehouses, right? And this is how they're able to get their products to, sometimes it's just once a day, sometimes it's...
What is it, like 45,000 dealers?
No, they have 170,000 retail stores, right? That's insane.
Yeah.
This is like FMCG scale.
It is. I'll actually argue that it's actually more complex in FMCG scale.
Yeah.
Because they're sort of like, refilling this thrice a day for a category like paint.
And what you have to remember is, this is, in terms of volume, paints are almost 4 times bigger than FMCG. Right? You're just moving these, 100-liter, 25-liter, 50-liter cans, right, in these huge trucks across the country. Right? That's so much complexity.
So the factories that you mentioned, the 16 factories, they go from having a single factory in Bhandup to, actually it's quite strategic, right? They set up another factory in 1981 in Ankleshwar.
Which is in Gujarat, which is just 3 hours from Bombay.
That's right. Then the next one that they set up is in Telangana in 1985. And then the next one that they set up is in UP in
West,
1990.
South, North.
You sort of see how it's not setting up factories. I can imagine a parallel universe where Asian Paints decides that let our factories be closer to where we are, we'll just ship them wherever. But it is absolutely building this network saying our factories need to be closer to where our markets is. And of course, after factories comes, where does paint go after it's manufactured in a factory? It goes to depots.
Right.
Of which it has what, 150?
Yep.
This is before they had tech, before they had ERP systems that automatically scheduled.
So what is ERP?
Enterprise resource planning. These are, in some ways, we talked about an operating system for Asian Paints culture, but an ERP system is essentially the operating system for a supply chain. Sorry, I have to say that. It's like if you run either Mac or Windows, that's what decides how you use your computer. An ERP system is essentially the operating system on which a manufacturing plant or a supply chain runs, right? It decides where are you producing products, what goes into it, when is it scheduled, when is it getting shipped, when something is done, when is it getting manufactured. All of that is done using ERP systems. And I think Asian Paints has been an absolute past master at ERP systems. But to go back to the precursor of ERP systems, etc., this person was essentially saying that back before, today these routes, like from, of course, the paint goes from these manufacturing facilities to these depots, and then from these depots, they have to figure out how often you're going to send paint to which retailers. They have long past the stage where a human being could figure out where to send it. Now it's all computerized. It's like, you'll go here and then you'll go here, and it's all algorithms, right? The precursor to that is the guy from Asian Paints picking up the phone and calling retailers, and this is Tamil Nadu, right? So, and you're going to think that my Tamil pronunciation is wrong, but he's calling up and saying, Sir, Vandi, unga side varude, eda sarakku venuma, right? Basically, he's saying that I'm coming there, your side, with the,
truck.
with the truck, these small trucks, right? Do you want anything?
Yeah.
Right? So they're calling up individual dealers and retailers every day and asking, I'm on anyway coming. And this is the earliest versions of the route planning that's actually happening. Actually, not even earlier. This is 1990s. And from this, they obviously move on to much speedier things.
So
That's
it's
a
great that
great.
they're not waiting for the dealers to call them and place an order, right? My truck is going to be on your route, right? Do you happen to need anything, right? So that, I mean, if a particular store on that route needs something, then that means they don't have to service that store separately a couple of days later, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember, we had earlier talked about how it's drilled into Asian Paints, everyone who works there, what the product codes are.
Yeah.
And I think the point that came up here is that you have to understand that everything is written in different ways. India is a large country. So if you're writing Utsav distemper in Malayalam versus Tamil versus Gujarati versus Hindi versus other languages, there's a lot of scope to make mistakes. Imagine you're speaking on the phone and talking to someone and he tells you something else, tractor, distemper, you hear it as tractor emulsion, and you send the wrong thing. So those number codes that they use are a way to kind of guard against that. Because you're essentially, you know the number, the dealer knows the number, and the number is never wrong. So these are the precursors before ERP.
These are like those, some of these, Korean and Japanese restaurants where you just like Thai restaurants where you just say, I want numbers 27 with
Yes,
35.
I love those restaurants, right? Because you're not going wrong, right? Like, I mean, it's a number and I place that number.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what else is one of the best stories about the supply chain, the efficiency and speed of Asian Paint supply chain? It's so good that even when they're late, they're fast.
Yeah.
Do you know the great example of that? Which is what happened with ICI and with Velvet, which was their premium emulsion.
Yeah, yeah. I think it sort of opened up a new category for emulsions, right? I think it was called Velvet Touch.
Yeah.
ICI Velvet Touch, which is now Dulux, right? Dulux Velvet Touch. And everyone took to it, right? Demand for that particular product was so good that they couldn't keep up. The company couldn't keep up.
ICI couldn't keep up.
Right?
So you've come up with a great product.
Right. They underestimated, the number of takers for that product, right? Suddenly, customers are walking into, this was sometime in the 80s, I think. Customers are walking into dealerships and asking for Velvet Touch. They don't have it.
Now imagine I'm a customer. I'm walking into a dealer shop. I've seen this ad for this new premium emulsion. At this point, please remember, today we look at Asian Paints as a decidedly premium paints company, but it wasn't that.
It wasn't then, yeah.
It was very cost efficient. It had a great supply chain, but it was not a premium company, right? Instead, you're a customer, you walk into the shop and you say, I've seen this ad for Velvet Touch, give me Velvet Touch. And the dealer doesn't have it because ICA is unable to kind of supply it at that scale. What happens? What does the dealer say? The dealer says,
Asian ka Velvet.
Asian ka Velvet Touch. So, I mean, that's where it comes in.
That's Royal.
I don't have, yes.
Yeah.
And Asian Paints capitalizes on the fact that there is no Velvet Touch.
Yeah.
But we have a comparable product and it's Asian ka Velvet, which is their paint.
It doesn't matter. I mean, at this point, people don't really recognize Royal. Doesn't matter, right?
And compared to the powerhouse that it is today.
Yeah.
Today, you can imagine going to a shop and saying, I want Asian ka Royal. And imagine if a dealer says, Dulux ka Royal. It does not even compute.
Yeah.
So the point that I want to also make is that so Asian Paints is not new to the premium emulsion. It doesn't have an existing brand.
Yeah.
But it's just able to move paints faster. So it's able to capitalize on somebody else's slowness.
Yeah.
So Asian Paints essentially comes in and takes over the premium emulsion market, which ideally should have been ICI's to own.
What do all these competitors do? I mean, even when you're innovative, you can't really do much. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Let's take tinting machines. We spoke about it earlier, right?
Yeah.
Another example. Asian Paints did not. We spoke about not invented here syndrome, right? Asian Paints is looking at the market and saying, these Jensen and Nicholson folks have this new thing called the tinting machine. Of course, they know about it. I'm just exaggerating for effect. But they're not the first with it.
Yeah, in India.
Right? And Jensen and Nicholson is unable to scale it because these machines are expensive. They haven't figured out how many of them they can, supply into the market, how the dealers are going to pay for it, etc. They're not able to scale. Once again, what does Asian Paints do? It spots this opportunity, it comes in, it figures out this is exactly what we need, and it figures out innovative financing schemes where the dealers can essentially get this, and it backstops. And once again, it is late to the ATM, oh sorry, I keep using the word ATM, the tinting machine race.
Right.
But it completely wins the tinting machine race because of its scale and speed. That's what a supply chain is, right? And that's how they're able to win and stay ahead. Remember, we spoke earlier about momentum is the name of the game. It doesn't matter if you're the first player in the race. It doesn't matter if you were in the lead.
Yeah.
If you view this as a race which continues over decades, Asian Paints is this player which over time has just become, once it enters the race,
Yeah.
it's almost seems like a foregone conclusion that it will win.
Yeah.
Because it will bring everything that it has to bear.
It may happen in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, but it will happen.
Yeah.
One of the most fascinating examples that we both heard, right, when we met someone from Asian Paints about the power of its supply chain, he used this term joint value creation. Again, sounds super boring, as boring
I
as
remember that.
supply chain. But this was just, it's so tiny. I'm sure most people don't know this. It's not been reported, it's not been talked about, right? It's one of those, hundreds of things that happen every year or every few years, right? That just add up to something super significant, right? So he talked about titanium dioxide, which is one of the key ingredients in paint.
It's one of the, I think, most significant cost components
Yes.
of paints. If I'm not mistaken, sometimes as high as in some paints 30 to 40%.
Yep.
And a lot of it is imported from China now.
Right.
Yeah.
So, usually Asian Paints gets it from its suppliers, this is, until 2010, 2012, it would get it in sacks. It's slurry, it would get it in sacks from the supplier. It would reach the paint factory, right? It would be dehydrated. It would come to the paint factory, and then they would add water again, right? So 2 steps, right? So you're taking water out of it so that you could transport
to pack it in a sack,
right? And then once it reaches the factory, you again add water.
Because it has to be converted to paint.
Right? So they're wondering, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this 2 times, right? Why can't we just import the slurry, right? But that material is not really suited to being transported. So what do? They just got these RMC trucks, ready-mix concrete trucks.
Those giant ones that
that
keep
you see
moving, like there's a roller sort of thing inside which keeps moving.
So they just put the slurry in that and got the truck to the factory. They eliminated 2 steps in the process. I guess this must have resulted in significant cost savings for the company.
It's like one of those...
Again, first principles, right?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? Like, why are we dehydrating it and then adding water again?
But this can only happen again in a company where there's a bunch of people who not just are looking for ways to innovate, but also have the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
It's very rare actually, right? Like I can actually again imagine in most companies, it would go on for decades because people will say, just the way it is, right? Not my job.
It's not like they had to do this, right? They were already very profitable. But someone said, why can't we squeeze a little more out of this, right? If you can add like even half a percentage point to your margins by doing things like this, why not do it, right? And this is how they're able to keep the cost of paint so low, right? There's a reason why the cost of paints relative to the cost of labor, as we discussed in the last 25 years, has barely moved, right? Or, less than half as the cost of labor.
Good.
That's because it's doing all these tiny things, and it's able to pass on the cost savings to the customer.
If I put it in a slightly different way, if you imagine Asian Paints over the last many decades, and you assume that the paint that they're manufacturing must, all things like over time, tend to inflate, the prices tend to inflate. So that's obviously happening to the ingredients that Asian Paints uses as well, right? But behind or underneath the surface, Asian Paints is actually every year doing something to create an efficiency that kind of matches the inflation itself, right? as a result of which you don't as a consumer see that effect,
Yeah.
right? So the equivalent would be, let's say you're buying a car today and you go back like 20 years and you look at the price of the car, and it, like, the price of cars today are nowhere anywhere like that, right? So that's what efficiency does to Asian Paints. And of course, all of this leads to, this is not just manufacturing efficiency, this leads to, I think one of its significant, it's powered at the back end by technology,
Yeah.
right, by information systems. And very importantly, it's called systems, right? I was speaking to a couple of people and it was very interesting, and they said, it's not technology, it's not IT, it's called systems. Because I think Asian Paints very early on understood that in order to win at anything, you have to essentially create a system. Do you know that it was the first company in India? It decides to get a mainframe computer in India before most of the technology companies in India have ever got.
That's absolutely nuts. A paint company buying India's first mainframe.
Think about it, right? And this is, I
And
think,
I remember,
in
I think there was this really interesting
early
quote.
1970s,
Yeah.
just for context.
There was an interesting quote by someone they hired from IIT Bombay. He said, IIT Bombay doesn't have as good a computer as Asian Paints.
Yes.
Right? That's...
And it's very interesting because this is like 1970, 1971, right? But it had the vision as an organization back then to say, look, if we have a computer, right? If we have a powerful computer, we can do a lot. And what do they do with it? So, and this is early, right? And they start putting people in charge of it. They actually hire people, like some of the people that they put in charge of trying to figure out how to use these mainframes are the MBAs that it hires from some of the IIMs, right? And what do they do with it? What's the thing that they do with it? First, they use the computer to try to figure out
demand forecasting,
demand forecasting and
Yeah.
routes.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is another thing which Asian Paints is so good at that, nobody can touch it even today. Back then, it had around what's called, roughly 750 stock keeping units, right? Each paint variant, each paint brand and color is a stock keeping unit, right? So there are about 750 stock keeping units, and the most popular ones are Apcolite and Tractor. And within these, they have different variants as well, right? Sizes, packs, etc. and all that. By the 20th of every month, they would have dealer data from across India, which we punched into cards.
Yeah.
Remember, this is mainframe. This is pre...
Oh, I can't even picture it.
That's right, right? So this is data that is, stuff that we read in books, right? Oh, you remember they used to feed data into these giant computers using punched cards, right? Not even floppy disks, just punched cards, right? And then there were like systems executives, right? Some of whom include like, Veera Raghavan, who's like,
one of the other hires from...
That's right.
Yeah.
8 programmers, 12 punch machine operators, and 6 computer operators, right? Data from the field would arrive at Bhandup factory in the evening around 5:30, following which the punch operators would punch this into the cards, right? Till around 11 p.m. This is like, the most manually intensive part of this thing. Post which the cards are fed into this mainframe system in the night shift. And by 4 a.m. in the morning, the mainframe generates tapes which are printed out by 7 a.m. for distribution, right? To figure out where paint should go. This is 1970s, mid 1970s, right? This is what they're doing. What does this do? Now, this essentially then helps Asian Paints try to figure out where do I need to send what paint, at what time, in what size, etc. Initially, it's just a better way for it to forecast it.
Yeah.
But over time, it becomes a better way for it to understand where the demand is as well, right?
Yeah.
And I think the apex of this goes to, I go back to tinting machines, right? Because I was talking to this person who said the latest tinting machines take it to the level that the tinting machines are on sort of an auto mode. The tinting machines know what paints are being ordered since they're computerized and they connect it to the internet and network.
They get real-time data.
They get real-time data, and they don't even need to, the dealer doesn't even need to make any orders, speak to anyone, the tinting machine itself sends data. So the tinting machines that exist today are some version of that for Asian Paint, because as it's getting used through the day, it is automatically sending orders back to Asian Paints, which is fulfilling it in real time. So you have this beautiful feedback loop which is operating, which again, somebody has to come and like defeat it, because now what it generates is the most valuable product. Like the cliche that we're all used to in these times is like data is the most valuable asset. And just like that, Asian Paints has gone from using supply chain to merely send paint and understand what's going on to generate this incredibly valuable data. Like for example, it could look at a particular area in a particular city and then be able to say, in this time of the year, these are the paints that are required, and that data is worth gold. Because if you get that wrong, if another competitor doesn't have that data, it doesn't know what to send.
So
And
is it a tech company that happens to sell paints?
again, like absolutely, I think like, so its supply chain leadership essentially then goes back to technology and its investments into computers, and then starts generating these reams of data that become even more powerful as a way to kind of lock in its advantage. So a lot has happened till now with Asian Paints, but we have to remember that we're still in the 1980s. Maybe it's best if I tell this through someone else. There is this other Gujarati entrepreneur who started really small in trading and then starts a company and then starts manufacturing and then vertically integrates and becomes really good at it. And he ends up taking the company public in 1977, right around this time, which is, I'm sure it was not just on the radar, I'm sure it was visible to the founders of Asian Paints that, wow,
this is possible.
Yeah. Do you know which that companies that IPO'd? It's still considered a landmark event in India's like stock market history, corporate history, etc. Who's that small Gujarati
Who
entrepreneur
started out in
IPOs?
Yemen, right? He worked at a fuel pump in Yemen, right? Dhirubhai Ambani,
Dhirubhai Ambani and Reliance Industries.
India's most valuable company today.
That's right. So they've IPO'd. Reliance Industries has IPO'd in 1977. And Asian Paints is now at this stage where, remember, they've got their computer, they're investing in brand and advertising, they're expanding. They're obviously like now it's been some years of hiring from the IMs, etc. So as a company, they can see that, look, we can do much more and we're not limited by our own ability to generate cash flows from our business. We have the possibility of going to public investors and saying, would you like to invest in Asian Paints? Because now they've seen Dhirubhai Ambani doing that with Reliance Industries.
Yeah. Why just go to a bank, right? Now they're too big to get another partner like Jamnadas Vora.
Or lucky that Jamnadas Vora essentially ends up in bad times and sells it back to them. Imagine if he still owned 36% of the company at this point in time.
Yeah.
We would not see the Asian Paints that it is today.
I don't know. You guess, I mean, he would have been a lot more influential than any of the other.
Yes, and that's important because you have to remember that one of the things that breaks most companies is when founders have differential equities, right? And significantly so. These are four friends, two friends who came together with two others and who are equal shareholders in the company. They are equals. Even though we say Champaklal Choksi is the first among equals, their shareholding is the same, right? Now imagine an alternate universe where the four of them together control 64% of the company and the fifth person alone controls 36% of the company.
Yeah.
It's obvious that that fifth person voice would have a lot more say in the company.
Yeah. So no fifth partner, no bank, just go to retail investors because Reliance has already shown you how to do it.
Absolutely. And it's a fantastic opportunity. And they go and the great part is by now, Asian Paints realizes that hey, we got to go and convince people to invest in us as a public company, but we already know a good job of convincing people about our brand. So they understand branding and advertising. So if you go back and listen to, I mean, if you look at what some of their advertising strategy is in the run up to their public offer, they talk about we're an existing, I mean, and this is some of the ads which come up from Anupam Gupta's book. Which paint company offers you a gilt edge equity investment on a silver platter? You
Wow,
can see
I don't know
the,
whom they were trying to convince with.
yes, but you can see the advertising influence here,
Right.
right? This is not a company which is saying, right? I'll give you another example. Which paint company has put India on the world map? And of course, they have already diversified to some countries outside India. It's not big, but still. When Asian Paints profits have gone up 27 times in 20 years, what's in it for you? And another one, how many paint companies have issued 3.4 crore as a bonus on an original equity capital of 10 lakh? You sort of see that these lines are targeted at people who need to be convinced, and they know this is not someone just saying, here is an offer, these are the shares on offer, this is what they're
I
actually.
think they also had to do a lot of educating at this point, right? We're talking about a time when people didn't have a lot of money, and the only investment that they could think of was FD or maybe post office deposits, right? I don't know, small saving schemes, right? Very, very safe. You put your money there for like 10, 20 years and you hope that your kid gets to buy a house with that, right? So you were dealing, but to be fair, I think Reliance had already primed the market. Dhruva had already primed primed retail investors for something like this, right? So I guess Champak Lal Choksi's job was a little easier, considering Asian Paints decided to go public 5 years after Reliance. And they priced it at 23 rupees.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not just the only, the price is of course interesting, because if you look at the price at rupees 23, they were just valued at 4.5 times their 1981 earnings, right? That is nothing today. Like
Yeah.
literally, I mean, like, I mean, as a multiple.
So what that means is, the valuation of the company, what your company is worth, is just 4 times your profits of the previous year.
That's right. And of course, no one
And
has a window into the future.
We're living in times when companies could be valued at 100 times, 150 times, 200 times. So that's how a lot of these tech companies go public, right? I mean, they make a tiny profit, but your valuation is disproportionate to that. But here we're talking about 4 times.
Yeah. And of course, if you'd bought, like, I know sometime back earlier in the episode, I said it's one of the cliches of Asian Paints, right? When you read any story about Asian Paints, there is always this mention of, if you had invested in the Asian Paints IPO in 1982, this is what your money would be worth today.
We both said we hate that math. But when you see how much it's appreciated.
Tell me, how much is it? Like, hit me again.
10 shares bought at the time of the IPO.
It would be what, 23 into 10, 230 rupees.
Yeah, would be worth 44 lakh rupees today.
1982.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say that I obviously can't take back my words, but I do wish my dad had made that investment. Like,
and held on to it.
Yes, and held on to it, of course. Like,
yeah.
How much did you say? 44 lakhs?
Yeah, that's roughly like, it's compounded at 25, 26% every year for the last 43 years.
Yeah. That's 1982. Again, Asian Paints goes public. Around this time, this is interesting because this is the early 80s, right? If I'm not mistaken, 1984 is the Asian Games.
Yeah.
Doordarshan, the state-owned television operator, goes into color in around the same time, 1984.
Yeah, that's when you start, the explosion of color TVs in the country.
That's right. So again, to tie it back to India, and we keep coming back to this, that Asian Paints' own growth is tied at the hip to India's. This is the time when India's growth itself goes up a few notches. It's like the beginning of the consumer boom. There's color television. There's, of course, like the IPO itself, and is a fantastic place. I mean, I want to kind of bring in another company and a person here, which is very important, which comes later in the story, which is DSP Financial Consultants.
The investment bankers too.
That's right, led by Hemendra Kothari. They are the investment bankers that partner Asian Paints on this. Of course, this IPO, with the benefit of hindsight, we can say is a great success. It's oversubscribed 10 times. In today's times, it may not sound like a
Yeah.
lot because
You have 200 times.
yes, but this is
But you're talking
1982.
about, there weren't so many retail investors. I'm not even sure if UTI was around then, right? So there weren't too many investors, so I'm not surprised it was only subscribed 10 times.
1982, Asian Paints has its IPO. In many ways, it's the end of a particular chapter at Asian Paints because the founders then decide that it's time up for our generation to be controlling this company. So a few years later, in 1984, the remaining two founders, which is Champak Bhai and Suryakant Bhai, or Champak Seth and Suryakant Seth, retire from active management. They were chairman and managing director respectively. And interestingly, Champak Lal would stay on as the
Chairman of the
company, reflecting his status as first among equals. And this is important because this goes on to become a sticking point later on. Subsequently, Atul Choksi, who's Champaklal Choksi's son, they get elevated to managing director in 1984. So it is the formal stepping back of the first generation of founders and the formal stepping up of the second generation of founders into managing director roles. This marks a significant shift for Asian Paints.
Yeah.
This also marks the beginning of something. This marks the beginning of what would be incredible investor love for a public Asian Paints. Up till now, it's been a private company. Now it's a public company, and it's not just their paints and their supply chain and their technology or their management strategy that is appreciated, but now it's a public company and shareholders love it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was first dealers love, painters love, right? Now shareholders love. And there are a bunch of very strong reasons for that, right? I mean, shareholders at the end of the day, they don't really care about how great your business is if it doesn't reflect in your numbers, in your profit and loss statement and your balance sheet. And you just take out an Excel of Asian Paints and its competitors. It's just mind-boggling how good this company has been for so many years, so consistently, right? I think earlier we talked about how, it used all these savings and invested in its own business. For the last 3 decades, right, if you look at where its funds have gone, consistently 30 to 40% of that has been reinvested in the business, right? This means that it's not making these expensive, unnecessary acquisitions that don't really pan out, or it's not using its funds to repay expensive debt, right? And its competitors don't even come close. Right? You look at any of its competitors that are listed, they don't invest such a big chunk of the funds that they have back into into their own business. And this is significant because you invest it, you expand your capacity, you put up new factories, right? That allows you to capture more and more of the market, right? And we also talked about how they also reward shareholders really well.
What does that mean?
In terms of dividends, right? Again, you look at how much of the funds they've used to sort of repay as dividends, that's also 40%, right? You're talking about 30 to 40% being reinvested in the business and roughly 40% being given to shareholders as dividends. So why would they not love them, right? And everyone talks about, this is yet another term, right? Talked about supply chain, joint value creation. There's yet another term which is super boring, sounds super boring, but it's central to how investors look at listed companies, which is return on capital employed, which is nothing but how good you are at turning your capital into profits.
Sita, this also marks a new era for Asian Paints, and it finds a new set of people who absolutely love it.
100%.
Shareholders. Because up till now, Asian Paints has been a privately held company. There are a lot of people who love it. Millions of people, right? Consumers, painters, dealers, employees. Well, I would say even rivals secretly admiring it. And of course, the founders. But now, there are these shareholders who've invested in the company, and they are probably its biggest admirers, right?
Yeah, 100%. This goes back to the number which is discussed, right? You buy 10 shares of Asian Paints during its IPO, right?
For 230 rupees.
For 230 rupees. And what, 43, 44 years later, that would be 44 lakh rupees.
You know what? I still cannot process that number. So I'm going to do the simplest thing. Like, I know you're probably not going to like this, but what if I put 44 lakhs as the numerator and rupees 230 as the denominator? What does that come to?
Be over 19,000 times.
Wow. So you're basically saying if I had the ability, or if my
Almost
dad
20,000.
had the foresight to invest. So he was essentially investors in 1982 was saying, imagine if someone came to them and said, would you like to invest in this IPO for your kids? And they'll be like, what? Don't worry. 1 rupee invested here is going to become 20,000 rupees like in 2026. Who would have said no? But who could have thought of that?
This is the kind of scheme that people tell you to stay away from, right? If someone came and sold you this, no, this is too good to be
Imagine
true.
if someone comes to you today and says, would you like to invest, for 20,000 returns over the next 30, 40 years? You'd be like, yeah, sure. What else
I'll
do you
call
have
the
to sell
cops.
me? But you know what? The freeform association that came in my mind when you said 20,000 times is another 20,000 right from the beginning of this episode, which would have been approximately the value of Champaklal Choksi's stake
Yep.
in Asian Paints had he not sold it back in 1997. So it's 20,000 times is the multiple that, a stock investment from 1982 appreciates to today, and 20,000 crores
Is what he would be
worth today. I know they're completely different 20,000s, but it's just incredible numbers, right?
Absolutely. And those 10 shares, interestingly, would have become 1,800. So you're talking about roughly a 180, 200 times increase in the number of shares.
Sorry, what's 1,800 here?
The number of shares that you would be holding today if you bought 10 shares in 1982, right? So you see the difference. The total value of your investment would be up almost 20,000 times. But the number of shares you're holding would have only gone up 180 times.
Sorry, I don't understand this number of shares. If I bought 10 shares back then,
because
wouldn't
companies, what companies usually do is they want more and more people to trade. Like as a company, the value of a company's share goes up, right? It becomes more and more unaffordable for a lot of people. Say it becomes, from 23, it goes up to 50, 100, 200, right? So you're sort of pricing out a lot of potential investors.
Even if someone wants to own one share, they no longer can because one share is too expensive.
So then how do you make it affordable for them? You slice it, right? So they have different ways of doing it. There's bonus issues and stock splits, right? So the stock becomes cheaper for people to own. So they've done that on multiple occasions.
And then it becomes more expensive. So you split it, it becomes cheaper, and then it rises again and you split it again.
So that's the power of this company, right? So even now, even after doing all of that, today it's worth what, 2,300 crore, 2,400 crore. So today, each share is 2,400 rupees. So they have made it cheaper and cheaper for people to buy. Despite that,
it's still 100x.
Investors have bought more and more. So one could say it's still not easy for someone to own one share of Asian Paints. It's 2,400 rupees, right? That's the power of this company.
That's incredible.
And also there are other, very simple metrics to look at that'll tell you how good Asian Paints is relative to its competitors. Something so simple as, how long it takes for you as a company from the time you buy your raw materials. This could be titanium dioxide and additives and whatnot, to the time that you actually get paid by the dealer. right? This is very important, right? This can't be too long. The longer this is, the longer your capital is stuck. You'll have to borrow money. There are cash flow issues. If you look at Asian Paints, that's roughly, I mean, if you exclude the last 2-3 years, which are an anomaly thanks to all the competition, they typically, go from buying raw material to getting their money back in roughly 50-60 days.
Wow. Like less than 2 months, they're going from not just, I would have assumed that like you're getting raw material and converting into paint and getting it into your dealers, but they're literally getting paid for it. And of course, RPPD must be playing a role here. Because a lot of people are paying them on time because they want that RPPD discount.
So something that they set in motion about 10-15 years before they went public, right, helps them a lot, right? And it's not a surprise at all that they have margins which are consistently higher than their competitors, right? You're looking at what is operating margin, which is nothing but how efficiently you run your company, right? So they're at like 15 to 20%, right? The competitors, if they're lucky, they reach 15%, the lower end of what Asian Paints is always capable of, right? In a bad year, what is a bad year for Asian Paints is a great year for its competitors.
Yeah, when you said a bad year, I'm reminded of this incredible anecdote. He said there are pockets in the area that I was where our market share was 92%, right? And he said at 92%, there's nothing you can hope for other than a good monsoon, right? I mean, and I had to ask him, what did you mean by that, a good monsoon? Because when you're at 92%, you're not winning any additional market share from any other competitor. You can only hope that there's a great monsoon and there's a great harvest, and then people are essentially, or the great monsoon has essentially washed away a lot of the paint and people are painting it.
You look for a divine intervention, right?
But divine intervention when sitting at 92% market share. And that's in some pockets, but I mean, of course, at a national level itself, it's like.
No, but that you would think like that only if you're a company like Asian Paints. You're like, I'm already at 92%. Now, what can I do to be even bigger in this market, right? There are only two ways of doing this, right? You increase the prices, right? Which we've seen Asian Paints doesn't do.
They don't like doing, yeah.
Right? Or you sell more, right? Which is where I think you need a divine intervention if you have 93% of the market.
So where in the 80s, Asian Paints has had a blockbuster IPO, and everything that it's gradually built over the years is now sort of coming together and compounding. It's an incredible time if you're at Asian Paints or you're an Asian Paints shareholder. But
there's always a but.
Yes, there's always a but, right? As we progress from the 80s to the 90s, there is the law of averages, right? Like, you cannot, no human being, no company can forever just stay focused, continue compounding, etc. There is also the law of entropy, which is over time, things start to settle down, companies start to get complacent. This is a company that's had an incredible run since 1940, right? I mean, just literally textbook stuff, right? It's in the 1990s. I mean, a lot of the stuff that they've done actually in the run up to that, starting from the late 70s to the 80s, for instance, they decide to go abroad, right?
And this happened a little earlier, right?
It happened in the 70s.
There's an interesting story there, right? The first country they chose was Fiji.
It's Fiji. And why Fiji? Because
it already had a huge Gujarati population.
That's right. Like community again, right? Like, I mean, you sort of, you get the sense, that move could have only happened in that era. It could not have happened in a subsequent era, because in a subsequent era, the company would know that you've moved beyond the Gujarati community. In the early era, the Gujarati community is what defines a lot of these companies. But anyway, they do have international expansions. They're doing okay, nothing much home to write about. They start, of course, setting up plants. They set up some plants, manufacturing, etc., in areas that are kind of adjacent to paints, or upstream or downstream from paints, etc., chemicals, polymers, rubbers, etc. One of them is Apcotex, which ends up being spun out and is today headed by late Champaklal Choksi's son, Atul Choksi. They start a bunch of other plants as well. There's also a pesticide plant which is started. It's called Ankur
Pesticide.
Chemicals.
Oh,
Yes. So this
Ankur
is,
is.
yes, this 1990s, around this era is this era of, in some senses, a sort of loss of focus.
But tell me this, was this because Asian Paints wanted to go in these different directions,
We
or the
don't know.
founders
We
want?
don't know that, right?
Right.
Because it goes public in 1982, and it's a very well run company. It has a great board, etc. But it's also the fact that it is a company which was majority owned by the founders, and the
Yeah.
founders' next generation is there in those. And
So is it the compulsions of the
it's
company or the founders, right?
perhaps,
Yeah.
right? Like the fact that Apcotex ends up being spun out and is headed by Atul Choksi. The fact that there's a second company in an unrelated area which just happens to be called Ankur Chemicals. I don't know if that refers to
The son.
Champaklal Choksi's grandson Ankur.
Ankur, yeah,
Right?
grandson.
I don't know that, right? This happens. And then also in, I think, Anupam Gupta's book, there's talk about in the early 1990s, there was talk about diversifying into some other areas like steel and cement, etc. So it's sort of very weird
One
because,
commodity and all commodities, right?
right. So Asian Paints is the reason why Asian Paints has been a stock market darling and an investor darling is because it is hyper focused,
Yep.
it is hyper efficient, it knows what it does well, and it continues doing that better and better, right?
Yep.
You mentioned earlier that it doesn't waste money on acquisition, many of which turn out to be failures. It also, I mean, great companies also don't just randomly diversify
Yep.
into areas, right? And Asian Paints hasn't done that. But it's the 1990s when these sort of things start appearing. And it's sort of the era where people start to wonder what happened is, what's happening with this company? Why is it losing focus? Why doesn't it do the thing that it does really well, right?
Right.
And
this had never happened in these 40, 50 years, right? It was all about just, focus on paints. How do you make this super solid supply chain, distribution, and whatnot? And now, even if they are adjacent, I'm not really sure how integral they were to the paints business.
Yeah, so that's the thing with this adjacencies or upstream, downstream. Again, these are big words, right?
Yeah.
What is an adjacency? An adjacency is that if you're operating in a particular area, can you expand into something which is related to it? Like, for example, you're selling paints, but when people come to buy paints, they also want to buy putty with it. Can you also sell them putty? That's an
Yeah.
adjacency,
Yeah.
right? So you can say, yeah, I mean, and that literally happens. Asian Paints does have its own putty.
But someone coming to buy paints is not going to buy pesticides as well.
Absolutely not. That's an unrelated diversification. Thank you for that one as well, right? See, the thing with these things is, coming from the mouths of management consultants or on presentation, on PowerPoint decks, these look very compelling,
Yep.
right? But when an actual business goes into these areas, many of them turn out to be, they turn out to draw management attention. And
it's a zero-sum game,
It's
right?
a zero-sum game, right?
Yeah.
If you're paying attention on how to manufacture pesticides and learn how to do that, it must mean that you're taking away some of the attention from how to manufacture paints better.
Yep.
So this 1990s is this sort of, the early 90s to mid 1990s is this era of somewhat loss of focus.
But this is also a very interesting time for another company, right? Which is probably the only other paint company which has as rich a history as Asian Paints, right? It's basically two stories coming together. One story begins in the 18th century in London. Another story begins in 1898 in Amritsar, right? This is what, screenwriters and novelists dream of, this kind of story, right? So in 1760, Louis Berger, a color chemist, comes to London from Frankfurt, and he sets up Louis Berger. Okay, and then after he dies, his sons take over the business. In 1960, they merged the company with Jensen and Nicholson, the same Nicholson that introduced tinting machines to India, right? And they form Berger, Jensen and Nicholson. And then a decade later, BJN, as it's called, acquires British Paints, which already has a presence in India, right? And based in Calcutta, which was then the center of the paints industry. So this is how a German company and a British company come together
It's like a Frankenstein's monster of paint companies is being put together in the
So like,
background.
yeah, I mean, globalization at its best even then, right? Globalization and capitalism. And then BJN is now acquired by another company, a German company, which has a partnership with Vijay Mallya's father, Vittal Mallya.
Wow.
Okay. And then obviously it becomes part of that group, and Vittal Mallya becomes chairman of that company. And then he dies. Okay.
And his son takes over.
He takes over.
Wow. I did not see Vijay Mallya entering this
paints.
story.
Yeah. I would not have bet any money on Vijay Mallya being in pains. He actually acquired, a few more territories of this company, right? And then he wasn't so interested in this business. I mean, he did sell a lot of his father's businesses to focus on, beer and alcohol, right? And I told you about another story beginning in.
So there's a parallel universe where we could have been hearing about Vijay Mallya Paint King.
Kingfisher Paints. So in 1898, Kesar Singh and his father Uttam Singh, they begin trading paints. Like the four founders of Asian Paints, they start trading paints. Obviously, they don't make. There are brands around, and they distribute the paints of.
This is even earlier than Asian Paints, because they started in the 1930s.
Almost like 45, 50 years before them, right? And they come to be known as the Rangwala family in Amritsar. Okay, and cut to 1964, 3 years before Asian Paints becomes the market leader, they start making paint in a shed in Amritsar, just like the four founders did.
Oh, this story has two paint companies starting out making paints in sheds or garages.
Garages, yeah. And then they obviously become better, and they start exporting to Russia primarily, right? They begin with paint. Then such are the times that they start exporting a bunch of other things, whatever Russia wants from India, right? Helming this is Kesar Singh's grandsons, Gurbachan and Kuldeep. Kuldeep is the main guy here. He's the one with all the vision for where to take this company, right? He's like, okay, you want this, whatever you want. He tells Russia, Soviet Union actually, right? We're willing to export that, right? So they go from paints to toothbrushes to soaps and whatnot, right? At one point, he claims that he or his group was the largest exporter from India to the Soviet Union among all. So they go from, I mean, by this time, they already have a brand. It's one of those generic brands called Rajdoot, which is popular in, say, Punjab and Delhi.
This is a paint brand.
Yeah, Rajdoot. But this is where he becomes really, really big, right? And now, tying it back to Asian Paints, we talked about Biji Kurian, one of the earliest hires from IIM Ahmedabad.
And who left?
He joined British Paints and then Berger.
Wow.
Right?
So he's now with Vijay Mallya? So he's...
Yeah. He works for a company which is controlled by Vijay Mallya, right? And he knows that Vijay Mallya is looking to sell this business, right? And then he brings Vijay Mallya to Kuldeep Dhingra. And Kuldeep Dhingra acquires Berger in 1991. Right? And this is exactly what Berger needed. Right? Berger goes from the 7th largest player in 1980 to number 4 in 91.
Wow, that's some climb.
And by 97, 98, they're number 3.
So when you say this is exactly what Berger needed, I'm assuming you are implying stable ownership.
Absolutely.
Because they've gone through this Frankenstein's monster series of parenting and mergers and demergers, etc., till they end up with the Dhingras.
Yep. Like I said, every single paint company other than Asian Paints has had multiple owners. Shalimar, Nerolac, Berger, right? And that actually...
ICI.
Yeah, ICI. And that actually impeded their growth, right? Finally, this company, Berger, got an owner who was willing to stay invested, who was willing to give it more capital to really take on Asian Paints.
So you're really saying that Asian Paints has got a dream run till now?
Yeah.
Because its competitors haven't got their act together. And this is the first time when one of its major competitors finally gets its act together and the results are immediately visible.
Almost immediately,
go from Number 7 to what number?
Number 4 to number 3 by 97, 98.
97, 98. 97, 98 is an interesting time because we already talked about how the early to mid 1990s were a period of sort of loss of focus.
Yeah.
And 1997 is when we sort of shift the light back to the last of the remaining founders, Champaklal Choksi, who's 80, going on 81, and is about to drop the bomb, which is he's exiting the company. Champaklal Choksi, 1997. This is my absolute favorite section in the entire research, and it's perhaps because I'm a journalist, I'm just drawn to it. But it is so incredibly rich that, like, I've like in my notes, this is the part where I have the maximum amount of my own context and like, did this really happen? Really, did this happen? And so, I mean, let's talk about Champaklal Choksi, right? He is in many ways the first among equals. He's the person who's responsible for a lot of the strategies. We also know that he's headstrong. He's proud. He left home and said, I'll never come back home. And like, he's the one who, in many ways, he's the one who goes to IIMs and like, starts hiring MBAs. He's the one who discovers D. Madhukar, etc.
He takes the company public as well.
He's the chairman of the board. Remember that even after in 1984, once the last two, Suryakantani and Champaklal Choksi, decide to step down from active management, he continues to be chairman of Asian Paints board. Now, he's of course Gujarati, as are the other three founders as well. And with it, we've talked about the fact that how Gujaratis have a very strong family, respect for the family and community. And this is especially true for Champaklal Choksi, right? And as I was researching it, I went back and read about, this element for Gujaratis from Salil Tripaঠি's book. And, one of the things is each family sort of ends up training the next generation of their family and the next generation of this family. So there is this generational
and also
thing
their
also
competitors' kids, right?
Yes, that's very important, right? So before, I mean, and this is true for many diamond traders as well, and which many Gujaratis are, where if they have children, and again usually sons, they send them to be trained in a rival's firm.
Okay.
Right? And the rival knows it, of course.
Yeah.
But the reason why they do that is they feel that they learn better in an environment which is not. They're grounded, right?
Goes back to what he wanted in his IIM grads.
Yes, absolutely. Right? So this is, so of course, and within families and within Gujaratis in the same, there is rivalry. But there is also sort of this solidarity within them saying that if it comes to that, it's us versus others.
Yeah.
Right? And therefore, we all need to come together. This is really important. The family sticks together against the rest of the world.
Where have we heard this?
You tell me.
Yeah, it's also in the book. And I'm not at all surprised that Champaklal Choksi was a huge fan of The Godfather. Right?
I couldn't believe it actually. When I read that, I was like, wait, this is a cliche.
Yeah. Okay,
he's almost like this towering Godfather-like character over this company. And his favorite book is Mario Puzo's Godfather.
Yeah. And one of his other grandsons, Prashant, actually says in the book that Champaklal actually wanted him to watch the scene where Sonny, the headstrong, almost impulsive, older brother of Al Pacino, right, actually talks out of turn in a meeting with another gangster. And after the meeting is over, Marlon Brando or Don Corleone actually tells him, you never counter your family or go against your family, right? And my Al Pacino or Mike actually tells other brother, Fredo, towards the end of the movie, the same thing, right? And I think it's I don't know if it's in the first one or the second one, he kisses his brother and he tells him, I knew it was you, right? And he says, you never go against your family, right?
Italian Americans are like family. And of course, Italians are family and Gujaratis are family. And it's this sort of link. I never saw this coming. It's fascinating.
And I think that reflected in how he wanted his family to live, where he wanted them to live, right? The building they lived in was called Gitanjali. I think it's still around. And he built different homes for his three sons in the same building, right? He knew that obviously his sons would want to have a home of their own, so he built homes for his three sons in the same building. But he wanted to make sure that they all lived in the same building, right? And actually,
if I remember correctly, this is an apartment complex, and some of the other
they also lived in the
some of
vicinity.
the other no, I mean in the same building. Some
Okay.
of the other Asian Paints founders also lived. I think the Gitanjali had 9 floors, if I'm not mistaken, and of course, Champaklal Chosi stayed in one, and he bought 3 apartments for his 3 sons.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that still happens, right? You still see families living together, and I think it's the
Wasn't it you who talked about, what was that?
Jodi flats.
Jodi flats.
Yeah, you do realize that the reason they all stay together, why family is important, is because they're all running one business, right? That requires you to be together, right? The moment, I mean, one can say that having a business together also tears families apart. But that's also why a lot of these families stay together. They all run the same business, like first the 2 sons get involved, then it's like you said, hopefully at some point,
3 sons. He's got 3 sons. They all of them enter
and then the
business.
grandsons get involved, right? So they all need to be
accommodated.
Yeah, and they need to be on good terms with each other, right? So this is where we are. I mean, things are not going great at Asian Paints, but everything seems to be okay on the personal front.
I have an interesting anecdote here. Remember you talked about kitchen relationships? Here's where kitchen relationships makes a second appearance. Because Champaklal Choksi actually tells his sons and their wives, I mean, his wisdom is, once you get married, the kitchen and the business should be separate, and only then will you stay together and not step on each other's toes. So you see, there's a different kitchen relationships when it comes to dealers and families, and there's a different kitchen relationship here. Here with his family, the kitchen relationship is, let's get separate homes with separate kitchens so that you can all lead your own lives, but we stay together as a family.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting how the kitchen makes an appearance in different ways in Champaklal Choksi's life. He also says, the ambitions and aspirations of the next generation are difficult to manage, and the only way to keep everyone
Hence all
happy,
those diversifications, I suppose.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That like the only way to keep everyone happy was to give them their own business to run. This is Anupam Verb's, not mine, which is interesting, which sort of ties back to some of the unrelated diversifications that Asian Paints get into, and you sort of get the sense where the loss of focus is coming. Imagine if you're running a business and 100% you're saying it's only for that, but now you've got this other thing that I've got 3 sons and I've got to create something for them to run as well, which is a different loss of focus. And that's the loss of focus that I suspect started happening.
But this is where the story starts to get a bit hazy, because you also read that, a lot of employees were not happy with these diversifications and they actually went to Rajgopal Chari, right?
Right, Chari.
Yeah, and
right.
who actually went to Champaklal Choksi with this. And you get the sense that even he wasn't okay with this. So I'm not really sure.
I read that part. I was confused because he's the chairman of Asian Paints board. He's the only remaining founder alive. He's got, at this point, close to 10% in the company. How can he say that he's not sure what's going on?
Yeah.
The only 2 possible explanations are like he doesn't want to let the others know what's really happening, or that he actually is not in control. Which sort of makes you question, well, then who is controlling it, right? So, but this is where I think the cracks have started to form. And I think it's worth mentioning at this point that under the radar in many senses, remember, I mean, at this, like, if you think about the 4 founders, each of them after the IPO and subsequent, like, splits, dividends, etc., their ownership, if I'm not mistaken, in Asian Paints is 13.5% each.
Okay.
Right? Except for Champaklal Choksi, because he has been progressively since the beginning of the 90s selling his share down, not by a lot, by about 0.3%, 0.4%
to
at
set
a
his sons
time.
up.
this point, I've gone through numerous articles. Like I've gone through international articles, I've gone through Indian ones, and there is no one unifying theory. The remaining founders say one thing, Champaklal Choksi's son and family say another thing. But I'll tell you some of the strands that come up, right? The first thing is that seems to come up is that Champaklal Choksi seems to have some point believe that Asian Paints would need to expand outside India because it could no longer be guaranteed of success in India, because the Indian economy was opening up, competition was coming up. Therefore, it needed to go global. It needed to spend at least about 1,000 crores to go global in order to become successful.
Even though their attempts to sort of diversify into some of the other markets haven't been
Had
so
not been succeeded.
Yeah.
But it's also possible that he saw those attempts as not successful because they were very frugal attempts.
Okay.
They never spent a lot of money on international expansion. So it's possible that he saw that as, look, we would be doing much better outside India if we just spent more on expansion. So one of the sticking points becomes that we need to diversify even more, because in some senses Champaklal Choksi now believes that Asian Paints core business, the one that it's focused on all these years, is no longer defendable, or it has enough of a moat. Therefore, it must diversify. It must diversify to other businesses. It must diversify outside India. And in order to do that, it needs a lot of money. And in order to raise that money, he wants to go back to the stock market and do another rights issue and raise money, which would end up diluting everyone because they would have to again give up shares, right? And the other founders are not cool with it. They do not agree to this. So this option is turned off.
Oh.
As this option is turned
But
off.
we never really, I mean, it's hard to figure out where the other three founders' families stood on this, right? We have his version, his family's version.
That's right. There are some what they call contemporaneous reporting from that era, which sort of says the other founders saying that we felt that focusing was the answer and not diversification, right? So there are enough.
But was there a rights issue, or was this what's called, I mean, global depository?
Sorry, my bad. You're absolutely right. It was a global depository issue, which is again a different word for raising money from a different market, but the net result is still that you raise more capital, but in order to raise more capital, you have to dilute your own equity.
Yeah.
And I think the other founders were not comfortable doing
because
that.
their equity had already gone down during the fundraise, right? During the IPO.
Right. That's right? And they don't want to do that. So this is one, right? And of course, they're afraid that if you dilute any more, then you risk losing control of the company and you risk a bigger international player coming in and potentially acquiring the company. So the other founders are very careful and they say, no, this cannot happen. So this is one
that's what they were worried about.
Yes. The other thing is, now when this doesn't happen, apparently Champaklal Choksi says, then fine, let's increase the dividend that we're paying to shareholders, because he himself is of course a shareholder. And he proposes that be taken from 65% to 75% in a year. The other families disagree, but they sort of come around.
Yeah.
So you now again get the sense that Champaklal Choksi at this point seems to be losing faith in Asian Paints. Because let's go back when you talked about the fact that they give 30 to 40% dividend, but they also reinvest 30 to 40%. What is a business that says we're going to increase the dividend that we pay to shareholders? It means that business says we don't have any use for this capital ourselves. We don't think there's anything that we believe in where it's worth investing in. So we'll just return it to shareholders. So that's the other point that happens, right? And of course, the third issue is Champaklal Choksi has resigned in 1984. He's still chairman. His son has come on as, and that became a sticking point, right? Because after he resigned, his son, Atul Choksi, comes on as managing director. And there was sort of this loose agreement between the founders, because there were 4 founders,
that he would follow, succeed his dad as.
No, not really. There are 4 founders, remember, and all 4 of their members are second generation, are in the company. So there was this unspoken agreement that if a particular family member resigns from being an MD, then the next MD will not be from that same family. You have to sort of rotate and give it to another family, right? But with Champaklal Choksi, that rule also gets violated. He not only stays on as a chairman of the board, but his son Atul Choksi becomes one of the two MDs. So
Okay.
there is that's the other sort of sticking point where he, he's larger than life and he wants more for himself, etc. Right? Like this is
So it
my
could also
reading,
be,
right?
I mean, yeah, the fact that he outlived the other three founders and continued to be in control for much, much longer.
I can actually imagine that. Even though technically at this point you have to remember that his shareholding is less than the other, but yet he is one of the originals, right? To use a particular phrase, he's 80 years old.
He's Don
So I'm
Corleone.
sure there is a lot of respect because the other founders are all now second generation founders. You don't so easily challenge
Don
one of
Corleone.
that's right, Don Corleone, right? So this is happening, and as this is happening, because of this, perhaps because of his disillusionment, he started gradually selling down his shares in the company from 13.5% every year through
It's
the
down to
early
almost
90s.
9.1%.
It's down to 9.5% actually,
Was
right?
it?
It's down to 9.5%. And the other founders perhaps realize that this is inevitable, but they don't realize, they just think that, oh, since he's gone from 13.5% to 9.5% over many years, and that too progressively by selling 0.4%, etc. at a time, they think that this is a linear process and he'll gradually sell it over the next many years. They're not prepared for the fact that he's in some senses lost belief in Asian Paints, and he wants to possibly sell off. So this is where it sort of gets interesting. Now,
what's really fascinating is you said, the other three families expected him to gradually sell the 9% that he still owned of the company, right? Whatever plans he had, I'm sure they were in the making for months.
yes, absolutely. And I can tell you the date.
I don't know if they had any idea of what's coming.
I don't think so, because I think then they would have done something to preempt it. I'll go back to 1997. Remember at the beginning of the episodes that I said that he passed away in July 1997. But I said that in March 1997, he wrote the chairman's letter in the annual report where he said that things are looking great, we continue to do well. That's March 1997. He, through his son Atul Choksi, would the very next month in April 1997 start figuring out a way to sell most of his shares in the company. And this is, and remember I talked about Hemendra Kothari and DSP.
The ones that took the company
right, which is
public.
now DSP now is called DSP Merrill Lynch, and Hemendra Kothari as well. Of course, he's still the great Hemendra Kothari. And Atul Choksi and Champaklal, on behalf of Champaklal Choksi, sells roughly 36.6 lakh shares to two foreign investors, Capital International and Morgan Stanley. Right? The negotiations start apparently April, but it's announced in July. Right? Now I come back to July 30th, which is the day that this news breaks that he sold most of his shares. And sadly, it is also the day that Champaklal Choksi later that night or early next morning passes away. Right?
Oh, they don't sell to ICI at this point?
No.
Okay.
Right? So the shares are sold to Capital International and Morgan Stanley, which are two foreign international investors. So Champaklal Choksi passes away thinking that he's broadly exited Asian Paints, and he tells his grandson so. But what happens is, once these, remember this is, from what I understand from the news reports, etc., the remaining founders and Asian Paints board did not know of this sale.
Oh.
Right? And apparently, neither did Morgan Stanley and Capital International. They didn't know who these shares were from.
Oh.
And when they found out that
sold
these shares are from one of the founders of Asian Paints and that the other founders don't know, they figure out this is a hot potato. There is no way we can do anything with these shares, and they back away from this deal. So this deal falls through.
So the deal that he made before he died falls through?
Yes.
Okay.
That deal is no more. Right? Now, after this deal collapses and Champaklal Choksi is passed on, his son Atul Choksi then negotiates a new deal with Kotak Mahindra.
Okay.
And this deal is also, it's a secret deal. Now, Kotak Mahindra doesn't have the money to buy these shares. They are lent the money to buy these shares by guess who? ICI, and which has been languishing in India and desperately wants a way to kind of move up the ladder in India. So
A hostile
ICI
takeover.
lends the money to Kotak Mahindra, and Kotak Mahindra purchases the shares, which is why it's like a two-step deal.
So they were
And
basically
again,
sort of, Kotak Mahindra was just a middleman doing the deal. So
the deal-
between the three founders, they owned roughly 40% of the company, right? 13.5%.
That's right. That's right. Roughly 40% of the company, and it's a public company as well. Once this news reaches the board, Asian Paints board, now this sets up what becomes one of the most significant corporate takeover battles in India of that time, of 1997. Because this is an Indian company. It's a publicly listed Indian company. It is at risk of being taken over
Or rather
by a foreign company.
failed battle.
A failed battle.
Yeah.
Right? Remember earlier you talked about, the founders were afraid of a foreign company ending up taking over. That's exactly what came to be. Now this sets up a boardroom battle where under that time's rules, the shares, now let's understand that Kotak Mahindra has these shares and they've sold it to ICI, but those shares are worthless till the company agrees to transfer them from Champaklal Choksi's name to ICI's name, right? And the company refuses to do that. It says it is a potential takeover battle. This is not just a mere acquisition of shares. Instead, this is an attempt to take over an Indian company.
But yeah,
and it is one of the biggest corporate battles.
I can see
of that time.
how this was perceived at a time when we didn't have too many global companies here, right? And a listed company, a homegrown darling of investors. Now you have a middling foreign company which has a lot of capital thanks to its parent.
And which has surreptitiously acquired these shares, right? It's not even in the open market, right?
Yeah.
So this becomes sort of a test for India's, at then, fairly fledgling takeover code. Now, there is something called the Foreign Investment Promotion Board. Back then, you must have heard of it, FIPB. And after a long drawn-out battle, FIPB and the Indian government side with the Asian Paints
The three founders.
board.
The three founders.
The Asian Paints board. I think this is important because Asian Paints has had a history of, one of the reasons why it's been so successful in the stock markets is, unlike most other Indian companies that go public, it truly had an independent board.
Yep.
Yes, it had representation from all of the founders on the board, but all of the other independent directors, etc., were truly independent. So it's had this long, by now 15-year history of being a really well-managed, run professional company where the board isn't just a rubber stamp of the founders, but it is truly an independent board. So that stands it in good stead.
But the three founders' families have their way. That's the outcome.
That's right. That's another way to put it. So, ICICI cannot. ICI, my bad. ICI cannot acquire those shares. And what ends up happening is, now the middleman that you're talking about, Kotak Mahindra, is now stuck with these shares that it has sort of, now who bears? Because if ICI cannot acquire these shares and you sort of bought them from the Choksi family, what use do you have for it, right?
And the Choksis definitely want out.
Right. So this is sort of like a choke point, because now the remaining three founders and Asian Paints have sort of turned the tables on this secret move by Champaklal Choksi's family. And ICI is obviously unable to acquire these shares. Right?
So they end up selling half to UTI, which was the only mutual fund.
That's right.
In
So you mentioned that, right?
Yeah.
The half of the shares, so under pressure, because now you got to get, this is like, it's like a hot potato in your hand. You don't know what to do with it. There's no point holding these shares, because ICI's intent was never to just acquire them and hold them to it, right? So now they have to sell it back. So they guess who they sell it back to? Yes, they sell it back to
They sell
Unit
half
Trust
to-
of India,
Yeah.
half to Unit. And guess where the remaining half of the shares go to?
The other three founders.
That's right. So Champaklal Choksi's shares end up being sold back, I would say under duress,
Yeah.
back to the three founders. Does that remind you of another time back in Asian
A
Paints
founder,
history?
or rather a partner, selling under duress.
That's right. Jamnadas Vora, who was the fifth founder who had 36% at one point, ends up selling his shares back to the remaining four founders. Except now, there are only three remaining founders, and the fourth founder has also sold back. Even though he's no longer there, his family sold back 50% of his shares back to the remaining three founders. And this brings a fantastic, and I mean, you see why this chapter is so interesting to me, right?
Yeah.
It is just absolutely out of, I mean, one couldn't construct this, it reads like fiction.
Ironically, I think just about 6 years later, ICI, which wanted to acquire 9% from
Oh, this is good. Yeah.
right, ends up acquiring a similar stake. Asian Paints ends up acquiring a similar stake in ICI.
That's right.
Right? That's the government stake in ICI. Right? And interestingly, they sold the last of whatever they held in that company just last year after JSW bought AkzoNobel, which is what
Which is
ICI is called
ICI.
now.
Yeah.
Right.
So just think about it, right? Like, ICI wants to buy, I mean, because there's been a lot that we've got. So I'll just try to kind of, capture it in very simple points. ICI wants to buy Asian Paints. Therefore, it secretly tries to buy Champaklal Choksi's stake. The stake falls through. They are forced to sell it back to the founders. Asian Paints end up buying a 9%, 9.2% stake in ICI, which it holds on to. Many years later, it sells that stake.
It keeps selling it.
That's
gradually.
right. But the majority of the stake, it finally sells in the market. And what's ICI now? Well, it's AkzoNobel, which is now majority owned by JSW, which is one of the new competitors for Asian Paints. What a story.
Yeah. It's something that began somewhere in the mid 90s, finds its resolution in 2025.
And now I go back to that line that I opened the story with, which is Champaklal Choksi telling his grandson Ankur, you have to create the next Asian. Now, do you realize the significance of that phrase and how things played out over time and how sort of they came ironically full circle?
Yeah.
Isn't just incredible?
Absolutely. Like I said, this is stranger than fiction. You couldn't come up with a story like this.
Choksi family's exit. I was looking at what happened to Asian Paints because you could absolutely imagine the loss of a pivotal founder and family member and shareholder and all the acrimony that resulted from that would have in some senses pulled the company back and like caused it, and it's happened to many companies where a fight between founders just distracts the company.
And this is not just a fight between founders, right? This is the exit of the person who shaped the company more than any other founder.
And him publicly sort of showing that he'd lost belief in the company, that this company couldn't succeed by itself doing what it already did. That sends a message to shareholders as well. Right? You'd imagine that things would go south for Asian Paints. Instead, the opposite happens. In the 27 years since then, which is 1998 to 2025, since the Choksis left Asian Paints, its sales have grown 42 times and its profits have grown 55 times. By doing more of what they had been doing. By going back and focusing on what they already. So it is a repudiation of Champaklal Choksi's loss of faith in Asian Paints. And it makes me wonder about that phrase which he told his grandson back in July 1997, which is, Ankur, you have to create the next Asian. The next Asian was Asian.
Yeah.
So there's this time in the 1990s where, remember the era where Asian Paints is somewhat losing focus, where it uncharacteristically does something which I would never think of it, which is it goes and shortlist 3 management consultants
The
to
sharpest
come in.
folks in any industry.
That's right. To come and tell it what it should do, because it's sort of like we may be floundering, you tell us what we should be doing, etc. And one of them is a foreign management consultant. It's not mentioned in the book. And they apparently tell Asian Paints that you should get rid of all these unrelated diversifications and go focus on. Now, obviously, this is being presented to Asian Paints board, I presume, and the board is chaired by Champaklal Choksi. And Champaklal Choksi is the person who actually, in some senses, is spearheading these diversifications.
So he wants validation?
I'm guessing he doesn't, because the management consultants say that you shouldn't be doing this. You should be getting rid of this and focusing. So he asked them which are the other companies that you've worked with, and they've apparently advised some other Indian business group, an Indian founder, and who's facing competition from international rivals, and their advice was you should sell your company to this.
Yeah.
And Champaklal Choksi questioned them, saying, this is your advice to an Indian founder that they should sell out instead of fighting it? You don't know what the mettle of an Indian founder is?
Interesting that he had a problem with this and he did exactly that.
Yeah. So,
but to be fair, he didn't sell to an international rival. That happened later, right? He just
you could say that his son sold the shares to an international rival. But then the question also becomes that, would Capital International and Morgan Stanley, which have no interest in holding shares in companies for the long run, wouldn't they end up have
eventually
sold the shares to the highest bidder? And who might be the highest bidder? A strategic company that wants to potentially acquire, right? So there is, I'm sure Champaklal Choksi was smart enough to know that that would be the path it would take, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, to kind of come back to this, so after he passes, after this acrimonious fight which Asian Paints wins, one of the first things that it does, it hires a foreign management consultant. It's Booz Allen Hamilton.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if this is the same one, which, because I don't know, but I do know that Booz Allen Hamilton is hired. And what's their advice? Focus on efficiencies in the manufacturing plants, focus on working capital cycles, make them more efficient, free up the bandwidth of managers, allowing them to focus on the core business.
Paints, and more paints.
Yes, right. And they recommend a restructuring of the business towards domestic, decorative, international, industrial paints, right? So this happens. Now, after Atul Choksi's exit, the two of the other founders, second generation founders,
Abhay Vakil and Ashwin Choksi.
Yeah, right. This is the other Choksi family. They join as MDs and they sort of stabilize the ship over roughly the next decade or so after this almost kind of catastrophic series of events.
But I think we also have to remember that all those kids they hired from IIM Calcutta and IIM Ahmedabad, they've all risen.
Kids no more.
Yeah, they've all risen.
They're kids no more. They're all leaders now.
They've all risen through the ranks, right? And they just a step below, a rung below the families.
Yes, absolutely. This is, great that you mentioned this, because now it's like the seeds that you started planting in the 60s and the 70s have sort of reached this point where those seeds are now mature trees and forests and they're ready to take over. And just at this time, the second generation, there's a split that's happened. So the founders are like, never again. So they agree between themselves, the remaining 3 founders, that no one can sell their shares without the permission of the other shareholders. So they sort of agree that this can never happen again. But I think they also realize that we can't be fighting for control of this company. This company is too valuable for us to risk it like that. So for the first time in 2009, if I'm not mistaken, there is the role of a CEO which is created, a CEO and MD. And that role is filled in by
PM
seeds
Murthy.
that have been planted decades ago. The first CEO of Asian Paints is PM Murthy.
Yeah.
And thus begins a completely new era for Asian Paints, which I would call the CEO era. It's no longer the founder families are MDs in that sense. Yes, they do have their shares Yes, they do have board representation, but now they're comfortable letting professionals
Yeah.
rise through the ranks and become CEO of the company and decide the company's strategy
But
instead of trying to second
this
guess
sends a
them.
very strong signal to anyone, who's 40, 45, rising through the ranks. You can potentially become the CEO of this company.
And they do,
Yeah.
because PM Murthy becomes CEO in 2009. And this is just 12 years after Champak Bhai passes away. He's followed by KBS Anand as
Another
CEO.
IM recruit.
Another IM recruit. And he's followed by
Amit Singhal.
Amit Singhal, right? Who's the current CEO,
Yeah.
right? So this is what I call the CEO era. Now the CEOs are free to kind of decide. I mean, not completely free, no one is completely free in any organization, but they now have broad reign to decide what the strategy of the company would be. And I think the subsequent 20 years have been some of the best years of
Absolutely.
Asian Paints.
And this was also the beginning of what's probably a 20-year period which saw the remarkable rise of Asian Paints as a brand, right? Much
The
of it has,
golden age, I would say,
and the golden age of Indian advertising. And much of it has to do
much
with
missed.
Piyush
today.
Pandey, right? Who was closely involved in so many campaigns of Asian Paints, right? And this was a
With the
match.
ad agency O&M, if I'm
Yeah,
not wrong.
Ogilvy and so this was a match made in heaven, right? Asian Paints is a company that gets its start in selling to rural consumers, and Piyush Pandey is the guy who completely sort of changes the way advertising copy is written. It's no longer in English; it's in Hindi, because that's the language he's most comfortable in, right? And that's the language he thinks in, and that's the language he believes much of India speaks, right? I mean, that sort of, begins, that sort of gets this moment going where it's advertising in Hindi, Tamil, and you see that across Asian Paints campaigns, right? There is Mera Wala Blue. And
It was Mera Wala Cream when it started.
Was it?
Yeah, it's Mera Wala Cream, I think.
And I remember this ad where this guy comes home with swatches and he shows it to his wife and she says, oh, isme mera wala cream.
Yes, it changes. It starts as, if I'm not mistaken, it starts as Mera Wala Cream and then it becomes Mera Wala Pink, Mera Wala Blue.
Yeah.
They start to help
And you
consumers
say Mera
associate.
Wala linen white, right? What was your color?
Yes, that's right. Like, L132.
Yeah, and so many memorable campaigns, right? There was this Pongal ad, which was interestingly released in '92, and the music for that was composed by A.R. Rahman. And
Once again ahead of time.
And that was also the year his first film Roja released. I don't know which one came
prescient.
first.
Yeah. I did not know this.
Yeah. And again, the film was directed by someone who would go on to become a filmmaker himself, Rajiv Menon, a cinematographer and filmmaker. That is so memorable to anyone from Tamil Nadu at that time, the Pongal campaign. And then they just keep up with the times and they just keep releasing more and more campaigns with just...
And these are evocative, emotional campaigns.
Yeah.
These are also campaigns where the ad really makes paint personal. It takes it from a commodity to something that you sort of associate at a very emotional level. Like I remember this campaign of Har Ghar Kuch Kehta Hai. Now I'm speaking like a South Indian. Har Ghar Kuch Kehta Hai.
Yeah, and so you can see the evolution of Asian Paints as a company and how it wants to position itself. It goes from paints to color, Mera Wala Blue, Mera Wala Cream, to home, right? So it's no longer about paints, right? It's about color, it's about home, right? So it means a lot more to the people buying a can of paint, right? Because it's about their home, which they have, even now owning a home in India is not something that most people can dream of, right? So it resonates even more. And there's this really interesting story that I read about Bharat Puri, who was one of the recruits from IM who left to join Cadbury in '98. And he was involved in a lot of these campaigns while at Asian Paints, and he worked closely with Piyush Pandey. And when it was time for him to quit there was a farewell party for him at Ashwindani's home, and apparently he and Piyush Pandey cried together. Okay. And Piyush Pandey was amazed by the fact that right after the party, there was a puja to basically wish him good luck at Ashwindani's home. And he narrated the story to basically talk about what kind of founders, these four were. Right. And Piyush Pandey continued to work with Bharat Puri at Cadbury and then Pidilite.
I'm just trying to think of some of the other campaigns as well during this time. Like, so one of course was Khushi Ke Rang, or Colors of Happiness, right? Which is again like, trying to associate, I think, the painting of homes to festive occasions, etc. Because a home is, like you rightly said, it's like so close to people's hearts. And during this time, the last 20, 30 years has also coincided with the rising home ownership in India.
And rising incomes as well.
Rising incomes, home ownership. So people no longer. So I remember talking to someone who said that there used to be a time where if you got a 1 BHK or a 2 BHK, that would be it. And then you're like, I don't care what the paint that goes into, because my point was owning the home. Now we live in an India where people are like, look, this is an extension of my identity. I want it to say something when people come home. So the amount of time and budgets that people set aside for paint has gone up. And of course, Asian Paints, it's arguable that, do we have that view of paints because Asian Paints made us feel that way? Or did Asian Paints essentially end up
tapping into
what was? I mean, I would actually argue it's both. Asian Paints advertising has a strong role to play in how people see their homes today.
And also the way they've gone about building the brand is not just through advertising. I think that's just one part of it. In 2003, they launched what's called the Color Next Forecasting Report. It's called a Color Forecast Report. And this is 4 years after Pantone, the company that's known for its color coding system, which is used widely.
Correct, globally. Like if a color doesn't exist in Pantone, doesn't even exist.
Right. So Pantone launches its Color of the Year in 1999, I think. In 2003, they say they're not influenced by Pantone. They launched their own color forecast report, and they talked to interior designers.
What's a color forecast report?
So they talked to a bunch of people, interior designers, architects, FMCG companies, customers, right? They want to understand, which colors they're thinking about, which color is going to be in vogue, right? And they put out this report every single year, right?
It's like a fashion house.
Almost.
It's like next year's fashions, what will be on the ramp, but for colors.
Yeah. And the latest color of the year 2006, is Moonlit
2026,
Silk. 2026, which was released just a couple of weeks ago, is Moonlit Silk, which is this pistachio green.
Wait, it's Moonlit Silk, but it's pistachio green. Okay.
And some of the other names are Cardinal, Transcendent Pink, Intense Ocean.
You know what? All of these names sound familiar because they're here. You know what? I kid you not. I'm just going to read out some of the names here since you mentioned this. Pink Flamingo, Nursery Pink, Exotic Spice, Beautiful Beige, Perfect Peach, Quicksilver.
To anyone listening to this, Rohin is reading off his swatches, color swatches.
Yes. And my point is that there are like hundreds of colors here, and all of them have interesting names. So if you're just going by names, this also sounds interesting, this also sounds interesting, which is why numbers. L132. I'll never forget L132.
Yeah, and I think we know that advertising is not what it was today, right? And they saw that coming. They knew that television is not going to be the medium of the future, right? In 2017, I think, they launched Where the Heart Is on YouTube, right? When most brands hadn't even thought of doing
What's Where the Heart Is?
Where they go into a celebrity's home and get them to talk about their home and the choices they made, right? The furniture they bought, why it's so big, the location, the design of the home.
Sounds very advertorial, but it isn't, I assume. Is it?
No.
Like in the sense that it sounds like
they don't get them to talk about paint. They just get them to talk about their home, right? Like I said, they'd moved on from paint and color to home, right? So what does this home mean to you, right? Someone has a home and say, Alibag, why did you build this? Or they would talk about like, oh, we want to spend time with family, right? You know, I've always dreamt of owning this home, right? It may be small, but this is where we meet every evening for chai, right? And that was, I would say, the first of its kind. Now you see, I mean, you go on YouTube, you look for something like that, I'm sure you'll find at least 20 options. But they saw this coming well before every other brand.
And this is fascinating because this is the transition of their paint campaign from a focus on color, which is, if you see the Mera Wala cream, Mera Wala pink, Mera Wala blue, the focus is on, I get the color that I want.
Yeah.
So it shifts to being a pride-based thing. My home
Yep.
and what it means to me.
Yep.
Right? And of course, I'm guessing this sort of allows them to move up the ladder into more premium paints as well, because can you put a price on an emotion or your home? Anyone
Other
else can
parts
give
of
you the
your-
same color. If
Yeah.
I say Mera Wala cream, a rival company can give me the same cream. But can anyone come to matching my emotion for my home?
But this is not just really a branding exercise, right? This is in line with what the company wants to become, which is a home company, right? What, in 2012, 2013, they acquire a company which is into bath fittings, right? And these businesses are not very big, right? But it's very clear that they want to be a home company.
Sorry, before we move on from this point about color, I found something, I don't know if you've probably seen this or not, but one of the interesting things that they don't just do these advertising campaigns. I think in Tamil Nadu, they do this thing, it's called tractor emulsion Varnamalai, which is actually they partner with a very popular TV show on Tamil Nadu, and they essentially show case rooms. So if you're watching those TV shows, then you can essentially see rooms custom designed for Tamil sensibilities
I'm not
on
familiar
a
with
TV
that.
show, etc. Which is a very sophisticated kind of this thing, right? Because
Yeah.
you know that people watch these popular shows. You know that people in different states of India have their own color palettes, and
Yeah.
I do know that Tamilians have a certain color palette, and Malayalis have, and Gujaratis have, and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so they've done this kind of stuff as well. So the color, they've really kind of
Color,
own
home,
that.
color to home and sort of mass market to premium, right? And the latest sort of initiative in that sort of transition is this massive store in Bombay called Nilaya, which they
Yeah, you told me about. You went there, right?
yeah, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. It's 100,000 square feet in central Bombay,
I
right?
cannot imagine the rentals on that.
Oh no. And you just walk in. Obviously, you don't see Asian paints anywhere, right?
So it just says Nilaya.
Nilaya. And then you go there and
It sounds very fancy.
What
It
does Nilaya
like
mean? I
I don't know. It just sounds like one of those high-end boutique hotels
It is.
where if you must ask the price, it means you can't afford it.
there's no price on the tags, right?
Wow. See, I sort of landed that blind.
You walk in, there are these plants that you can buy, and then on your
Wait, plants?
yeah, imported, right? And then on your left is a candle library. Okay, you have candles from around the world, and then you have carpets from Uzbekistan. It's a collection of products that brands. They have about 100 brands or so. It's a collection of
So it's not just Asian paints.
no,
Oh, okay.
not at all. So I think it's that. This is what the company is about, right? It's no longer just about, hey, here's my product, I'm selling it, right? In the most obvious way possible, right? So here they probably want to be like Hermes, a luxury store by a middle class company. And they have all kinds of things. It's basically, new stuff they've picked up from auctions from around the world. There are these leather suitcases, which look like, they were used in the Darjeeling Limited, right? And those kinds of, and then you have
This sounds like a very curated, boutique-ish kind of place.
and they have stuff that they've commissioned. There are these, mini bars, beautifully designed by someone from Rajasthan, right? All kinds of things, and very sleek office furniture. I felt the place was a bit cold and it was almost like warehousey, right? It was almost like, but I was really impressed by what they put together. It's been a year of that. And Nilaya is also their wallpaper and ultra luxury paint
Oh yeah,
collection.
paint, that's right. Because when I was researching for this episode, I was looking at their paints, and my understanding was that typically their most expensive paints tended to be the Royal
Yeah.
luxury emulsions, and within Royal they have this Aspira range, which is the one with Teflon and it's washable and has it's fungus proof, etc., and all of that. Now I see there's one above that which is super luxury or ultra luxury. It's called Nilaya, and it says it's lime based paints. And I was, wow, we've again come full circle. We started with lime-based tuna distemper and we moved up all the way to luxury premium emulsions, and we've come back to discover the beauty of lime-based paints, hey, which happen to be just the most expensive. So what a fantastic...
You remember the global fashion house which was sort of called out for selling Kolhapuri chappals for some obscene amount
Which was
recently?
it? Was it Fendi? Was it... No, I forget.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember the controversy.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It's somewhat, it sounds like that, right? Lime-based paint, but...
Well, there is a phrase called chuna lagana. Discover the beauty of tuna, but slightly off-topic joke, but let's take it from there. The CEO era. Now, the CEO era of Asian Paints is great because they refocus, they have the golden era of advertising and brand. They grow the market, they win more market share. It's incredible. All of this is great.
Nothing goes wrong, actually.
Well, yes.
Until it does.
No. Wasn't it you who said there's always a but? There is always a but, right? And now the but is what happens when the founders sort of step back, or at least the first generation of founders gone, the second generation of founders obviously doesn't have that same, they're deeply interested and invested in the business and they're connected and they're kind of leading it there, but they're not the original founders, right? And now the leaders are really the CEOs. And as that happens, it starts to kind of change the culture of the organization itself. Right?
And that was fairly evident in the conversations that we had with a bunch of people, right?
That's right. And I think a lot of people say that a lot of the culture change sort of began, or they started feeling it from the mid-2010s onwards. If you remember, 2009 is, I think, when PM Murthy takes over as CEO. So mid-2010s is sort of like...
Anand is already...
The thing about culture is, yes, it takes a lot of effort to create it within a company. But once created, it sustains.
Yeah.
But you must, it's like planting a seed. It's hardest, the hardest phase, if you've ever done gardening, is getting that seed to kind of become a shoot and then become a young plant, because the risk of death is highest at that point, right? Once it crosses that stage, become a shrub, it's becoming a tree, it becomes easier. But you still got to fertilize it every now and then. You still got to water it so that it continues to thrive. You cannot assume that once a culture has been set into motion, it's self-perpetuating.
How many analogies have you had?
Yes, you know me, right? I mean, I can't, I love analogies and I cannot lie.
I can't think an analogy.
Well, that's why we're balanced. That's why we're co-hosts of this podcast. But you got a water culture, you got a fertilize culture, and you got to strengthen it every now and then. And what happens is now in this, I mean, if you really think about this organization, it's just gone through this near-death experience. One of the founders has left, the other founders have steadied the ship. Now it's the CEO era. There's a lot of significant shifts happening within Asian Paints. And as this happens, and this came on top of this period of loss of focus, etc. So each of the CEOs now sort of brings in their own element to the culture, because they want to make sure that they succeed. Remember, I mean, I
think it was 45, almost 50 years of Champaklal Choksi.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then you have 10, 12 years of the two MDs from the families, right?
Right.
Then it's 3 different CEOs. I'm sure you have a lot of what Champaklal Choksi originally wanted.
That's right. The trees that he planted continuing to fruit, if I may use my analogy. Right. But now you've got these new CEOs and they're great CEOs, right? All of them, they're impeccable, including the current CEO. But there's you have to see what is the fundamental difference between a founder or someone from the founder's family and a CEO. It's the tenure.
Yeah.
And the tenure brings with it their outlook on the company. A founder knows this is the company that I've built, or this is the I'm building something. May take 10 years for this to fruit. It may take 20 years to fruit. It's fine. I still got to do it because I'll be around, or my family will be around, right? But you have to understand that for a public limited company and for a professionally appointed CEO, the tenure is not the same.
Yeah.
Sure, but they're thinking, am I going to be here for 5 years? Am I going to be here for 7 years, 3 years, 10 years? And what can I achieve during those?
Can I create something that's going to outlast my tenure by a few decades?
You have no incentive for that, because you have to remember that if you are trying to create something, the fruits of which will be visible 20 years from now, it probably means you're essentially taking away current resources and investing it into the future, which means you're accepting that trade-off of lower current performance in return for future performance.
Right.
Now, it's hard for someone to do, because why would you accept lower current performance during your tenure so that the fruits of it could be reaped by a different CEO in a different era? Again, I'm not insinuating.
I would entirely agree, because they did try to, they did get into, kitchen appliances, kitchen fittings and bath fittings, right? Yeah, they're not significant yet, right? But that is a very clear signal that they want to be a home company, right? But it's still known as a paints company.
Yes, and those are diversifications which, those narratives you can still sell to investors, that we are diversifying, and you can get the benefits of that in that tenure, right? But I'm talking about cultural changes or invest in things for which there are no tangibles, and it's diverting management attention. It's like, while I was speaking, I'm reminded of this incredible phrase that I think it was Seema, my co-founder and our editor, told me in the context of a conversation of appointed CEOs. This is not for Asian Paints, so I want to lay that up front. Have you heard of this phrase called IBG, YBG?
No.
This is in the context of a different company and a different professional CEO, and similar context where someone said, look, why don't you do this? Because this will lead to long-term results. And he said IBG, YBG. It means I'll be gone, you'll be gone. That's the point that I'm making. That for someone to do something today, the fruits of which appear 10 years from now, 20 years from now, is harder. I'm not saying it's impossible. And so this leads to the sort of subtle changes in culture that start happening in the 2010s. For instance, there is this, a person that I spoke to said, now there's another company, consulting company, that sort of starts partnering with Asian Paints around that time. It's called the Vanto Group, right? Which is a leadership, fairly secretive, but also, tightly guarded group.
Until this person mentioned, we hadn't heard of it at all.
I hadn't, but then once I started reading about it, like the words cult-like, etc. Yes, alignment.
Right.
So one of the biggest things that the Vanto Group teaches, and Vanto Group does classes for, like it teaches and coaches leaders and employees of Asian Paints. And one of the values they stress on the most is alignment. Right? And this is a company which is not known for alignment. Alignment is get in line. Like if a decision is taken, align and get it done. This is a company that used to be known for the opposite of that, not invented here. Or there is exactly autonomy, empowerment, independence, make mistakes. I remember someone else telling me, saying that, look, I cannot remember a company where failure was tolerated so much. And that was one of the differences between Asian Paints and other companies, which is in other companies, you'd get punished for taking risky bets that end up in failure. In Asian Paints, you'd be allowed to get away with it because they understood that, look, that's...
I have a different version of that. Someone said at Asian Paints, at any other company, if I had 5 arrows in my quiver, they all have to hit bullseye. That wasn't the case at Asian Paints.
So you could waste the first 4 arrows because they go different places, and the 5th arrow it hits the mark, right? That's the point, right? But now let me use your analogy since you blame me for using.
Oh,
I'm going to
no.
stick with your
This is not
analogy,
mine.
right? So imagine you're shooting 5 arrows and they all have to be aligned, right? That's what you mean.
Yeah.
All 5 arrows hitting the same bullseye is alignment, which is not something that Asian Paints is known for.
Yeah.
And the person that you spoke to obviously comes from a different company. So this was a subtle change in the culture where it started to be about and this person that I spoke to said it was about alignment, either align or out.
Yeah.
Like either you get with the program or you decide you disagree and you're out, right? In that sense. So alignment became a huge big thing, right? So I mean, the exact phrase was at some point autonomy became sort of autocracy. Autocracy is a big word.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's literally became an autocracy, but autonomy shifted to autocracy. And I'm guessing, and I'm trying to retrofit why this may have happened, because the new CEOs in the CEO era, they've gone from we're doing too many things, it's too diversified, people are not focused, to we need to focus them.
Yeah.
We need to do the things that we do better. So it's understandable that perhaps alignment was the need of the
Necessary.
hour,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And I sort of understand where it came from, but I also see how it subtly starts to shift the culture of Asian Paints from within. Now, as this changes,
And we have to talk about what an insane bond all these employees have, right? They have WhatsApp groups. They know
Yeah.
what's happening, who's joined where, right? And it's such, and one of the people that we met,
it's cult-like.
but they talked about one of the guys that we met who spent 15, 16 years at the company. He went on to work at a few other companies, right? Where he said, everyone wants to know just about his tenure at Asian Paints.
That's
They
right.
don't care about the other
talent
companies.
density.
And the other two companies are fairly large, right? They don't care about these companies. They're like, okay, tell us how things are done at Asian Paints,
Yeah.
right? And that's incredible.
It's the same thing that I've heard from other people that I've met as well. Even after they leave Asian Paints never seems to kind of leave them.
Yeah.
And people are always kind of wondering, and they always reminisce very fondly about the talent density. Look, I was just surrounded by incredibly smart people, right? I felt like everyone was just pushing each other up. And so even though many of these people, after they left Asian Paints, they earn significantly more
Yeah.
than at Asian Paints, they sort of fawned about their days more in Asian Paints.
Yeah.
Never once complaining, I was underpaid.
Yeah.
Which validates Champaklal Choksi's hypothesis of I don't need to pay these MBAs well,
Yeah.
because they love the learning and the growth that they'll see within the company. So that was the culture. That was the tree that Champaklal Choksi planted, which is now starting to, I don't know, like fray a little bit,
Yeah.
and there's a bunch of other trees that are growing around it, etc.
Yeah, but the talent density point that you mentioned actually sort of makes me think about the quick commerce analogy, right? How they started setting up
Oh, we're
these...
doing analogies now?
Yeah, your analogy, right? A lot of things that Asian Paints did foreshadowed what was to come, right? Like, this distribution, right? You talked about talent density. I mean, before Netflix made a virtue out of it, they had talent density, right? People said, it's just impossible to be mediocre and rise up the ranks or even survive at Asian Paints. Right? That's the kind of company it was. I don't know if it continues to be that. I don't know. We haven't spoken to someone who's working there right now who can attest to that.
And honestly, even if you did, you'd never be able to figure that out. Like the thing with companies like Asian Paints, which are great over decades, is that if you go and sample them at a particular point in time and you look at what's happening within the organization, you'll never get the sense of this is what greatness means.
That's
because the greatness lies in that compounding and talent density, and it plays out silently over time.
Yeah.
Right? So if you go today, you'd not know the difference between this is still a great company or something is changed.
Yeah.
Right? You'd need to see it, observe it on a time scale, on a time series.
Yeah.
Right? Which takes me back to the cultural change. And as this cultural change started happening, of course, now we're in the 2010s. So now this is a different phase of India. This is now another boom period for India's economy. And You've got lots of venture funded startups, private equity funded companies. Everyone's in hyper growth mode. Salaries are going through the roof,
Yeah.
right? And people who've been at Asian Paints now for the last 10 years, 5 years, 15 years are suddenly seeing the differential between what they earn at Asian Paints and what they could earn outside dramatically change.
Yeah.
Even as this cultural change is playing out within. So many of them start leaving for other companies.
Yeah, and not just
And they're poached.
Yeah, and they're poached by new rivals, right? I mean, JSW, JSW enters the business, like we said, to basically to service their own, steel business, right? It has, someone told us it's about a 300 crore,
That's right, 300 crore, yeah.
business, right? Steel coatings. So they set up JSW Paints pre-pandemic. And then this JK Cement, we talked about Pidilite setting up, launching Haisha, right? But Asian Paints was sort of unflustered with all these companies getting into the market. It all changed in 2024, right? When Birla Opus launched with an investment of 10,000 crore, like we said.
But I want to kind of briefly complete that point about culture, because what happens is a lot of Asian Paints long tenured employees, which are in some senses the seeds planted 10 years ago, 15 years ago, start getting poached by not just paint companies, but FMCG majors.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the Cokes of the world, the HULs of the world, etc., by startups, by PE funded companies. So there is this for the significant, it's always been a small thing, but it sort of now becomes a significant outflow of talent, experienced talent. And obviously, it's a large company, it has to replace it. So now what happens is people come from the outside. And what happens when people come from the outside is that they bring sort of their own approach to doing things and their
So this is not someone you hired on campus at IIM.
It is not.
Yeah.
Now, for the first time, Asian Paints has till now been largely known for, in that sense, growing your own talent.
Yeah.
We'll find them young, we'll knock them down through our induction.
Not pay them enough.
Not pay them enough. Yeah, I mean, now that you say it, it's a very interesting way. But they grow. These people stay with Asian Paints for decades.
Yeah.
And they just become sort of know-it-all generalists that move across functions, right? It's hard to just replicate, go out into the market and hire someone from a different company and replicate. But that's what they're forced to do.
Yeah.
So now when they start hiring a lot of these lateral entry folks, experienced folks from other companies, they bring their own worldviews, their own cultures from other companies. And this is the same point in time where the culture within the organization also is fraying. So that sort of now is now two forces.
Yeah.
Your existing culture is fraying and it is being compounded by the addition of experienced people from other companies who come in and say, this is how we do things in my company. And the internal culture has shifted to alignment, right? So all of this is sort of happening. And I think this is the cultural shift, I think, which I'm honestly, when I look at the company and I look at all the innovations that it's made, I sort of tied back to all of this growth came from its ability to innovate, which came from its culture. So that is like the sort of wellspring which I'm now a little worried about.
This is the culture the company needs to thrive this century. I have no idea.
Yeah.
There's no way to tell. But the fact is, it has changed. It has led to an exodus of talent who are now running other paint companies.
Yes.
Right?
So your people with the best know-how are going to your rivals who have deep pockets.
Yeah.
Your existing culture is sort of fraying at this thing you have. So you see how it's sort of now becoming a little, it's like a cauldron which is like starting to boil now and bubble now, and what was stable now is sort of seeming a little unstable.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's gone.
Yeah.
Right? So into this comes, of course, Birla Opus.
Yeah, I mean, Birla and JSW, they just, like you said, who would look at a market where one company controls 60% and not say, I want a piece of that, right? For all these companies, it's of course that, but for some of them, at least JSW and Birla, it's something else too, right? These are companies where the next gen, right? You have Parth Jindal, who entered the business roughly a decade ago, the group, right? And
This
it's
is
not
Jindal's
Sajjan
son
Jindal's son. Sajjan Jindal,
of JSW.
grew JSW, from, I mean, it was an insignificant steel maker. It's not
It's a
what
giant now.
yeah, the largest or the second largest, right? And then his son comes in, and it's not a coincidence that they start getting into these other businesses after he comes in, right? Paints is one of them. Similarly,
So you're saying it's a playing out of the Champaklal Choksi story at a different scale.
yep,
New businesses are being created for the second generation of
yep,
JSW.
yep.
Where else?
And Aditya Birla Group, Kumar Mangalam Birla's two of his three kids, Aryaman Birla and Ananya Birla, they're also in the group, right? Now, there is another dimension here. Kumar Mangalam Birla became the head of the group after his father died very young, Aditya Vikram, in the early 90s or so, right? And to be fair, he has grown whatever he inherited from his father, steel, aluminium, right? He acquired Ultratech from L&T. But whatever bets he made, new bets that he made, right, haven't really panned out, right? The three big bets were retail, telecom, and financial services. Retail has been an unqualified disaster for the group. They had to sell the supermarket chain more to Amazon and private equity firm Samara. Right? We all know what happened in telecom, Idea,
Right.
right? Things were not great. And then came Jio and made it far worse, right? It just, priced everyone out of the market, right? And Idea had to merge with Vodafone. So now, in some sense, I think he wants to do to Asian Paints what Mukesh Ambani did to him.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm going to go, I'm going to spend thousands of crores, right? I'm going to undercut you again and again and again.
But there's no technology shift here. When Mukesh Ambani came with Jio, the technology shift was 3G and 4G to 5G.
Yeah.
And it was like, so there was that underlying shift of technology, which of course Jio rode and said, we'll make data so cheap that it's accessible, practically free for most people. And of course, that powered them to become the number one company in India, even
Yeah.
ahead of Airtel.
But we've
what's
established
the-
that there's no technology, there's not, no.
Yes,
right.
that is a commodity.
Yeah.
And
So it's all about how long can you continue undercutting the market leader, right? But when they launched the business, they said we're going to set up 6 factories, right?
on day one.
Yeah.
Or, I mean,
Yeah.
of launch, like
They
not
said
literally day
we're
one.
6 factories which cover all the 4 regions of the country, right? And now all 6 are operational, and these 6 factories alone account for 20% of the overall industry capacity
In paints.
in paints. Right, that's significant. So he's not messing about here.
So very interesting, because you're sort of saying that I will create capacity ahead of demand.
Yep.
Right? Because you just decided to set up 1/5 of the paint capacity to India. You clearly don't have 1/5 of the market share. What's their market share right now?
4-5%.
Right.
But that's because, like I said, they have 40,000 dealers and they tapped into their putty and white cement dealer network. So you've already signed up these dealers, right? Now, if they say, okay, can you get me this? You should be able to get it to them. Right?
But
If
as
not,
we've
why-
established before, it's not as easy as getting from 6 factory. It is that, the data advantage,
Yep.
the supply chain advantage, all of that.
But I don't think that should be a problem now. But, even if you don't deliver 2 times a day, you should be able to get it to them soon enough, at least once.
Which takes us back to turns.
Yeah, turn. Yeah. So I think, it's all in place.
get it,
They're
yeah.
losing money, right? But everyone expected them to lose money, right? At least for the first few years, right? So how long, can they stomach this for another 10 years? I don't know. But the fact is, finally, the space is very, very interesting. It's no longer, I wouldn't say it's synonymous with Asian Paints anymore, because everyone is this chatter, certainly. They're like, oh, all these people who value Asian Paints culture and its efficiency and its management would say, no, it's not going anywhere. Nothing's going to change, okay? It's going to come back to normal, right? And then there are others who say
What does that mean? I want to interrogate that a little bit, right? When you say it's going to come back to normal, what does that mean? JSW, which now is a majority owner in AkzoNobel, or Birla Opus is not going away anywhere. So
No.
when they say it's going to come back to normal, what do they mean? They mean that they're going to stop funding discounts.
Yep. And
but they're still going to remain significant players.
so they,
Berger is already
yeah,
number
so
two.
they will be like, Berger, maybe like 10% of the market. So Asian Paints is not going to go from 50 to 20%, is what they say.
Got it.
Right?
Which is fair.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as they keep growing the overall pie,
Yeah.
and even if they maintain a 50% or a 45% market share, I'm just like obviously spitballing here, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I was actually thinking of the fact that even Asian Paints knows, the leadership knows that this cauldron is slowly starting to get stirred and it's coming to boil. You know why? Because in 2021, if I'm not mistaken,
it was 21.
they launched their ESOP policy, an employee stock option plan where employees would get stock in Asian Paints. Now imagine this company went public in 1982. Right? To be fair, I think to the founders, they did reserve, if I'm not mistaken, about 5% of the
Issue
offering
for
employees,
Yeah.
and about 2% or 3% for others, dealers, etc., and stuff like that. But that was for anyone who wanted to buy at that point in time.
Yeah.
But subsequent to that, the thousands of people, tens of thousands of people who would have joined and left, never got any stock in this company, because if they had,
Yeah.
right, that would be a different story. That would be the Infosys story,
Yeah.
which is a company that just generated millionaires because employees were stockholders in the company itself. For the longest time, Asian Paints did not offer ESOPs. But you know which company did offer ESOPs? Berger. Right? I'm
for a
not
while,
quite
right?
sure. Yeah, it's been for a while now. I mean, I don't know whether it was philosophically or because when you're number 2 or number 3,
How do you get?
you tend to work harder because you need to. You can't say.
And how do you get talent from number 1?
Exactly, right? So they've had that for a while, and finally in 2021, in response to all of these exits, the entry of lateral hires into Asian Paints itself decides to offer ESOPs. I mean, I think that's a pretty big miss. But this was an incredibly successful company with an incredibly great bull run for the stock.
Yeah.
It is, you can imagine an alternate universe where the people most responsible for creating the success, which is the employees, would have gotten a share of it as well. Well, now it's happened in 2021.
But what did Champak Bhai say about paying his employees not as much as they deserved elsewhere because he was training them, right?
One of those things which was right in that era.
Yeah.
Because the competition wasn't as bad.
Yeah.
Right? But I think we're now in the CEO era.
Yeah.
And we're in the post-Champaklal Choksi era. We're in the CEO era. And if you're a CEO, you're seeing the impact of departing talent in your tenure.
Yeah.
You can't afford to be Champaklal Choksi and say, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We'll last this out over 10 years or 20 years. You want to make sure that people stick on right now.
But I think it still took them a few years after this trend began, right? I mean, the culture change that we talked about was in the mid-2010s, and the ESOP plan was announced in 2021, right? So I guess it took them a lot of time to come to this.
It takes time. If you're a large organization, it takes time for you to kind of, and especially, I mean, if you're what, a 80-year-old organization, you have this belief that I am Asian Paints and people join me for that. It takes you some number of jolts before you're willing to say it's possible that I may need to change a little bit.
Yeah.
Gattu. This is the time for me to bring back Gattu, even though Gattu was retired as a mascot in 2002. You know why? Because Gattu was prescient in other ways. He may know. You know what the tagline was for Gattu?
Something about surface.
Anything that needs painting needs Asian Paints. If you see some of Gattu's black and white ads from that era, there's Gattu painting over a dog. Please don't do that, kids. It's incredibly cruel. Do not paint over dogs. But there's Gattu painting over a painting which is on an easel. right? Like looks like a really expensive painting, and Gattu's painting over it. And there's Gattu painting over the head of an old man who's sleeping on an easy chair. Well, just let's admit that Gattu is mischievous. The tagline is incredibly prescient, which says any surface that needs painting needs Asian paints, which brings me back to where Asian paints is today. And there is this concept that exists at Asian paints. It's called share of surface area.
Yeah.
There are companies that measure their market share by share of wallet or share of mind. In Asian paints, it's share of surface area. At the beginning, when we talked about paints and we said, wow, it's a magical thing. Now, when I look at every place, I'm like, why isn't this painted? Why doesn't this need to be painted? That's literally one of the things that is looked within Asian paints, which is how many surfaces exist and what is our share of it. They're not looking at share of painted surfaces. They're saying just share of surface area in a home.
Yeah. And a lot of buildings have glass facades, right?
Yeah. I mean, now, so the share of surface area concept connects back to many things. Of course, it connects back to kind of Gattu. Though I don't, but I mean, it's fair, right? They're thinking any surface that needs painting needs Asian paints to now. You talked about glass, which is great, because when you look at glass, how did you come to glass? You came to glass because you're thinking, I'm Asian paints, somebody has bought a new home or they've moved into a new office and I'm going to go and pitch them Asian paints. But wait, why do they have so much glass in this home?
Yeah.
That's
French
now you're starting
windows,
to
right?
hit, yes, French windows. Now you're starting to hit, a different sort of limit.
Yeah.
It's not a competitor, but it is like a glass and you don't paint glass.
Yeah.
Right? And now you're looking at what else can I take a share of surface area from, which brings me back to some of your earlier points. You go into the bathroom.
Share of home.
It's a share of surface. Look at what surfaces do you have in a bathroom? You've got the walls. You're not painting most of those, right? They're tiled. So you've got the tile. Now you need to be there in the tile space. Well, there is a faucet on it. Asian Paints is, I think SS, what's the brand?
Yeah.
Where they've acquired like the brand. Or somebody has put wallpaper, on their wall, and that's, so they look at literally.
Or you go into the kitchen. So then they had to acquire a company called Sleek, right?
Which is kitchen hardware, right? So they're literally saying, imagine I give you this, when I tell you there's a bare shell home, which is what happens when somebody makes, a builder constructs a new home. Now, it cannot be bare shell. You got to put tiles on it. You got to put paint on it. You got to put faucets on it. You got to put all these other things, maybe lamp fittings, etc. So, Asian Paints, when I mentioned this to a couple of the people who worked at Asian Paints in its heydays of focus, they told me that this sounds like something that a consultant came up with. Right? Because it is that, it's an adjacency, we can also sell this, and this is sort of born by, how many years has it been since they bought these two businesses, the kitchen fittings?
12, 13 years.
And what's the share of revenue from these businesses today?
2%.
2%.
700 crore.
Right?
So it's pretty much a rounding error.
It's a rounding error.
Yeah.
So this is an area where now this is one of those bets that hasn't worked out. On theory, it looks good. You're Asian Paints, you're going to a consumer's home, customer's home, and you're saying, I can give you paints, I can give you tiles, I can give you bathroom fittings, I can give you kitchen hardware, all of that. Yes, it sort of makes sense when you look at it on paper, right? But it hasn't panned out.
But they have to remember, obviously they know this, right? If Asian Paints is the first name they think of in paints with tiles, there are, 2-3 other companies that they think of first.
And kitchen hardware and bath fittings.
Every single thing, right? And every single company in hardware wants to be a home company, right? There's a company called Inframarket, which is one of the, well-funded startups in the space. They in fact acquired Shalimar.
Oh, there you go. So now Shalimar's also got a stable owner, is it?
Yeah. I don't know if it's stable, but they do have an owner with deep pockets, right? And they want to be the Home Depot of India. Home Depot is this American chain for all things home.
Yeah.
Right? They sell fans, they sell concrete to build your home and to fit your home. They have pretty much everything.
There's also Pidilite, which is in the which was in the adhesives
Yeah.
business, Fevicol and
Yeah.
all, and they've also
Yep.
come in. So if you sort of see what's happening is that everyone wants to be everything,
Yeah.
right? So Birla, which is a putty company, wants to become a paints company. JSW, which had a steel coatings business, wants to become a paint company. Asian Paints wants to become a bathroom fittings company. Pidilite wants to become a paints company. Infra Market has acquired Shalimar. So it's sort of like this.
They're all finding different
Yes.
corners of the home to get into.
And while this is happening, while this fight over the home is happening, there's this other mega trend which is playing out, which you talked about earlier, which is the rising labor costs.
Yeah.
Right? So labor costs went up as a share of the overall expense from what 30-40% to about 60-65%. And there are some predictions saying that over time, as the cost of labor in India shoots up, it could go up to as high as 90%
Of the overall cost of
of
painting.
the overall cost of painting. Now, if that happens, or even if it doesn't, even if it goes to 80%, right? A lot of people are going to see, wait, if I'm going to spend 100 rupees on painting my home and 80 rupees out of that is the labor cost, is there a way that I can save it? Can I DIY that myself?
No, I don't think that's going to happen in India.
Why not?
Indians painting their own homes? I don't think so.
What if you could save 80% of the cost? So, I mean, this not that. I mean, outside of India, in Western markets,
Yep.
there is a fairly strong culture and the sale of paints and rollers, etc.
Yep.
Which, and by the way, since I've seen now painting kind of evolve through the ages, it makes me sound ancient when I see that. A lot of the painting these days is much simpler. Back then, it's a lot of it is with rollers and the paint is much more uniform. So, I don't know. I mean, if I take off a couple of days from work,
Yeah.
I could absolutely probably paint a couple of rooms in my home. Now, will more people do that?
I doubt it, Rohan.
Okay, even if they don't, there is the fact that labor is becoming very expensive.
Yep.
And the counter trend which is playing to that is that a lot of people are saying that I don't want to engage with unknown dealers and painters, which I think Asian Paints has, done a great job by addressing.
Beautiful homes, right? I mean,
That's
that
right.
Asian Paints, Berger, now Birla Opus, they all have that.
Right.
But I'm told that accounts for just 2-3% of the market.
So there's another bet that hasn't really panned out at scale. So the thing with...
So that's basically, I mean, that service is basically where you interact with the company.
Yes.
And the company tells the dealer in your neighborhood, and the dealer knows a bunch of painters.
Yeah.
Right? So you know that you're dealing with Asian Paints.
That's right. You don't just... So it's like a direct relationship with Asian Paints.
Yeah.
And I've done that as well, right? Like, I mean... But typically the quotes that you get from Asian Paints... Now, because we're Indians, we know, oh, if I'm going through one additional layer of Asian Paints, I know that you got to add in some extra margin for yourself. And that's true. Because whatever prices you get by going through Asian Paints is always significantly, at least about 20% more expensive than what you would get by going normally, right? But that's another area that they're trying as well. So now, while these trends are sort of playing out, there is of course the fact that we've discussed that how painting behavior itself has changed over the last so many years in India. There's this constant thing that comes up about in market after market when it comes to consumer behavior is the rise of Gen Zs, right? Gen Zs behave very differently from earlier generations because in many senses they don't have that reference point of this is how we used to do it in the past, and they just decide to do their own thing. Now, it's an open question how today's Gen Zs are going to be painting their homes.
Will they be able to afford homes? Right?
I want to make an avocado toast joke, but I shouldn't.
Yeah. No, the thing is, I mean, if they're not going to be able to afford a home, they're going to stay in rented homes for, say, the majority of their life. Then the owner of that home doesn't have an incentive to buy premium paints.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know what? You're absolutely right because it takes me back to that conversation I had with my painting dealer, and he said there is a difference between the repainting home, which is by an owner, versus the repainting by the landowner or the landlord for just between tenants. And in that case, the landlord typically says, do it the cheapest and do it the quickest.
Yes.
It's usually one coat of paint
Because
or
they have
two
to do
coat
it
of.
every 2 years, 3 years. Every time a
That's
tenant
right.
leaves, they have to repaint
That's
it.
right.
Right?
Right. So if the thing, and to connect it back to Asian Paints brand campaigns about the pride in your home, and all of that doesn't exist if you're living in a rented home for 2-3 years, right? If
Yeah.
if more people are going to be, if more younger people are going to be staying in more rented homes,
Yeah.
it's the impact of a brand is not going to be that significant.
It's not just that, right? I mean, we were kids at a time when Asian Paints ads were everywhere, right? You would open your morning newspaper, switch on the TV, right? And even until 5 years ago, right, it was on. It's everywhere, right? But now, if you were to ask your son, who's what, 16, 17,
He's 16.
right? Does he have the same sort of connection to
I
this?
don't think he sees ads mostly. Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
there you go. So what does it make? What does it take? This is not a question just, limited to Asian Paints, but for any company which has built a brand, how do you sustain that brand? How do you make that brand resonate with 20-somethings now? Do they really care for how's a brand even going to be built, right? All that they have right now are the results of what they did 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, right? What are they doing now which will make 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds 20 years from now feel the same way about the brand as we do?
That's a great question, because if you take their acquisition, their entry into the kitchen hardware space or the bathroom fitting space, that's about what, 12, 13 years ago?
Yeah.
So it should have been one of those bets from 10 years ago, which should be playing out now, but it hasn't yet, right? Or if you look at their home painting service, should have been one of those bets that should be playing out now. That's 20 years old, right?
Yeah.
So I actually, this is the thing that I sort of always wonder. I sort of try and zoom out and say, what must be happening in Asian Paints right now or in the last 5 years, which we are unaware of right now because it's very early stages. But 5 years later, 10 years later, we'll say, boy, that one really like took off.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not very clear about that because already they're operating at such a peak market share, and you have all these other players, everyone who wants a piece of the cake, right?
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, someone actually mentioned that the very fact that they started conceptualizing the luxury store in Bombay, Nilaya, during the pandemic, right? They didn't have Birla Opus, right? I think it was sort of just a few months before its launch, before the announcement. But you already had JSW, Pidilite, JK Cement, right? And was the pandemic, right? But they still went ahead and conceptualized that, and they launched it last year, right? So someone actually said, if a brand could do this at a time like this, they're not certainly thinking about the next 5 years or 10 years.
That's a great observation. I don't know, are they making the next IKEA of India?
No.
I mean, you could see it's sort of like a path that leads from whatever you described the Nilaya store to me. It looks like if that succeeds at scale, you possibly have like a line to IKEA-like business.
Yeah.
Right? But
so I think then it's no longer about selling a lot, right? Because you're selling stuff.
Does that mean Champaklal Choksi was right that they needed to diversify, except that he just got his timing wrong?
I don't know. Yeah, but to be fair, I mean, in the last 20 years, they have done very, very well by not diversifying, right?
But what got them through the last 20 years will not be what gets them through the next. So this is the point where I think it's worth. I mean, when we debated this, right? We debated how do we end episodes of Intermission? Do we both stick our necks out and make predictions ourselves? And it didn't seem right to me, because I think when we set out to make Intermission, we said that, look, these are the stories of India's greatest companies, and we were clear that we want to tell you how these companies were built and how they operate, how they innovate, etc., so that you as the listener can try and take a call on what happens in the future. So we didn't want to come in and stick out our own necks and give our own opinions, because maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. We're fairly confident of the story that we've told today, right? We don't want to push it over to conjecture territory by saying this is what I think will
Neither of us
happen.
has a crystal ball, and I don't think anyone does, right? So it would be really presumptuous to say, this is where it's headed. This is going to work. This is going to, flame out. No one knows, right? In 97, would anyone have said that this is not going to affect the company? If anything, the company is going to bounce back and is going to be stronger than ever. I don't think anyone would have said that, right?
Yeah, I
And
agree.
in 2015, would someone have said Asian Paints is going to have a competitor unlike any that it has faced so far? I don't think anyone would have said that, right? So that just tells us that there's absolutely nothing we can say about the future, right? Except that it's an absolutely remarkable company which has had its ups and downs, more ups than downs, right? And an incredible visionary founder who also had his ups and founders, yeah,
Of which, yeah, that's right.
yeah, and a company that now has to sort of decide between being a paint company and a home company.
Share of surface area.
Share of surface, share of home.
I go back to what I said at the beginning of this, which is if this were a movie, this is when the lights slowly start to come on and flicker and the curtains start to go down. And the words intermission flash on the screen. This is actually Asian Paint's intermission. Even though we've told the story of a company which is 84 years old, this is really Act 1 for this company.
Yep.
Act 2 is possibly the next 84 years. What will this company do over the next 84 years? What does it have? What will it be its pillars for the future? It would be fascinating to think about what its next 84 years would be look like. Many of which, of course, will be the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years as it deals with competition. But I kind of get the sense that this is one of those companies that's going to survive for the next 84 years.
100%.
What would that look like?
I would love to know.
And that's intermission. Thank you for letting Sita and me tell you this wonderful story of Asian Paints with episode 1 of Intermission. We have more episodes coming up. We also have a lot more material on Asian Paints. For all of that, you can go to theken.com/intermission.